Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Survived 9 Real Horror Games? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Uraraka Ochako rushed up the front steps of UA, heart thumping in her chest. Today is the day. The first step. All I have to do is pass the entrance exam. I can do this. I know it. Pumping herself up, she jogged down the path to the building, her eyes flashing over the people who were walking with her. From attention-grabbing blonde spikes, to pink skin, and even a towering teen with 6 arms. And then her eyes passed over him and something deep in her skull tingled, a warning. Instinct, flickering on and making her notice the teen walking ahead of her. He looked almost fragile. Short, thin, and most of his form hidden by a dark tan jacket with a fake fur collar that reached halfway up his cheeks, revealing only the barest smattering of freckles. He had earbuds in, his loosely spiked green hair falling to cover the rest of his face from the cheekbones up. Aside from the loose black slacks and tan jacket, the only thing visible about him was the long boxy case slung over his shoulder. Likely tools or gear for the physical exam. If she was right, they were allowed if built by the applicant. Beyond that was something about his stance. He moved with a weird silent grace, his steps sure-footed. There was a tension to his frame. As she jogged by, his eye darted her way, deep fathomless green and black focusing on her, before flicking back forwards. She wondered why she felt like she was being acknowledged and then dismissed. Breaking free from her thoughts, she passed the teen, hearing the faint bass beat of his music as she passed within reaching distance. Why did he look familiar? Damn it, I can worry later. Exam now. No built-in cheat of a quirk, no hero here to save you, and a drive to be somebody. Oh, you will work wonderfully. What? Who are you? Because the world isn't ready, and I'm tired of waiting. I want to see it. The end of all my work. What is it? What do you want from me? I want you to become a survivor. I want you to win. Tenya breathed deeply and slowly as he listens to Present Mike explain. However, he was interrupted from his thoughts by a very faint, almost imperceptible sound from the side of the room. A slow, repetitive sound. A rasp, metal on stone, he believed. It took a few seconds for him to identify it, but when he did, he frowned. A figure to the side, sitting on the very end of the very back row, a blade and sheath half drawn in his lab, though the shape was too far and too awkwardly angled to make out. At the very least he could say it wasn't a katana. A ring with a flat stone plane sliding over its edge. If not for his acute hearing, he may have even missed it under Present Mick's voice. And if he could hear it, he guaranteed that most of the other people near the teen would also hear it, possibly drowning out the instructions. What a diabolical plan to get a one-up over the competition. In fact, Mick's words offered another question. He stood up and offered his insight to the examiners. May I ask a question? There appear to be no fewer than 4 varieties of faux villains on this handout. Such a blatant error, if it is one, is highly unbecoming for UA, Japan's top academy. We are here to be molded into model heroes after all. And then he turned his attention. And you, with the sword, do you think this is a game? Your maintenance is distracting and should have been done earlier. Cool, sharp eyes looked up from under limp black and green hair, and the blade in his hand was closed with a smooth rasp of leather and wood on metal. Apologies. It's a nervous tick of mine. I'll refrain. The words were soft and calm, but clear and easy to hear. Accepting such a reason, Tenya focused back on the examiner, as the 0-pointer was revealed and explained. For some reason, he couldn't help but feel cool sweat along his spine, as if he had just had a close encounter with something dangerous. Later, as he readied for the exam, he couldn't help but seek out the green-haired teen. It took several moments, but there, in the shadow of the wall next to the gateway, stood the teen. His jacket was unzipped, revealing a tight black shirt, laced with what looked almost like rips made of metal. Hanging from it was black straps leading deeper into his jacket, where a myriad of shapes was hidden under the loose form. And at his side was the sword. It was clearer now, the long, fairly wide blade, and the wide, blocky crossguard. Ida considered confronting the teen once more, berating him for off-putting the other exam applicants with his demeanor, when the shout of, "Go!" from present Mike grabbed his attention. By the time Mike had finished yelling about how there were no countdowns in real life, the teen with green hair was gone. And a downed one-pointer rested in the street past the gates, far ahead of the rest of the examinees rushing that way. It's quite simple. There are 9 games I've loaded into the simulation, each one designed to teach you skills and force you to think creatively. Complete every game and you get to leave. And the world will get to see exactly how effective my designs are. Aoyama grunted as he fired once more, another robot shattering under the force of his laser. It had to be the 10th or so, most of them the higher value 2 and 3 pointers, and he still had plenty of time. However, as he jogged forwards to search for a new target, he heard the whine of engines and turned a corner to see a pair of 3 pointers charging the same green teen who had been singled out during the explanations. He stood, sword held in his right hand as the 2 robots closed in. Taking a deep breath, Aoyama began to ready his laser once more before the teen's left hand raised, and 2 shots rang out, the sound of gunfire startling the French teen. He barely had time to register the matte black gun in the teen's left hand, held back and away from the 3 pointers charging him, and instead at the bot that had been flanking him, which was now smoking from a cracked lens in its face, and leaking oil from a hole punched through its chassis. As the other robot grew closer, the gun was swiftly holstered, vanishing in the depths of the tan jacket, and the green-haired teen stepped forwards. A swinging robot fist, fast and strong enough to crush through cars and buildings, but missing green hair by over a foot. The teenager had stepped in closer than the fist was passing and brought his blade up and around, left hand supporting the right through its motions, moving faster than Aoyama could trace. As he did, the gears and wiring of one shoulder flashed with sparks, wiring severed before he lunged up and off the knee of the robot. The blade pierced through the neck of the beast, through cables and wires, and was torn to the side, leaving the robot to twitch before slumping, disabled. In all, both takeouts took less than 10 seconds from start to finish. Aoyama had barely had time to gather his nerves from the sound of the gunshots before it was over. Green eyes met blue, and the mysterious green-haired teenager pivoted and leapt down from the bot, before heading further away. Perhaps I should hunt down some less contested points. Yes, that will be for the best. Aoyama took a turn away from the young man with the sword, focusing back on his own task. Is that the kid? A tall man wearing loose dark clothes watched the screens, glancing down at the suited animal next to him. The simulation survivor. It is. His application was quite interesting, I must say. Particularly when you consider his absence from schooling for the last year. The fact he managed to pass the practice exam sent to him is remarkable. He's skilled. What about his mind? There lie the problems. Isolation, trauma, stress and anxiety are all through the roof. But he does seem to have a handle on it. Coping mechanisms and an understanding of his own triggers to a frankly wonderful degree. Send in the 0 pointer. I want to see how he reacts. A button pressed, and the rumble of the robot moving echoed through the observation room. Aizawa kept his focus on the green-haired teen. Show me your potential, Izuku Midoriya. Uraraka gasped, dropping the robots around her, and panting from exertion and fighting off a wave as nausea. TW. 28. She began to advance, running deeper into the city, before the ground rumbled. She glanced up, eyes widening as she took in the massive form of the robot that was grasping the building. In fact, she was so distracted she didn't see the falling debris about to bury her. But then a hand grasped her shoulder, and she felt herself get pulled. She recognized it as something almost like a judo flip, dry and sure hands gripping her arm and shoulder as she was pulled back and swung around from the collapsing building. She left the ground just as the impact of debris shook her out of her stupor, but by the time she was about to say something she was on the ground. Over 3 meters away from the impact, having been sent sliding across the street. Hey, you can nullify gravity, right? That voice was calm and smooth, and she glanced to see the teen she had noted on the way in. He stood, arms still holding her back behind him as he focused on the massive robot tearing through the area. His sword was sheathed at his side, and he was rummaging inside his jacket for something with his other hand. That thing's gonna cause more problems and damage than leaving it solves. I need to either stop its movements or kill it. Mind using your quirk on me for a minute? He glanced back over his shoulder, eyes gleaming with intent. Here. She tapped his arm, and suddenly she could feel the faint lift of pressure from his grip on her shoulder, fighting back the surge of nausea that it sent through her. Thanks. Hold it for about 30 seconds if you can. Sorta want to land after this. And then he was gone, leaping up at an angle and, surprisingly given how hard she knew that sort of control in zero gravity was, landing in a window frame several floors up across the street, and then leaping from there to the opposite side of the damaged building the zero-pointer was crashing through. She lost sight of him, the robot already moving and causing more damage to the street, kicking up dust and smoke from its actions. Any other applicant nearby had long since vanished from the scene, and with nausea racking through her skull, she could barely stand straight as she jogged away from the robot, before grabbing a nearby car for balance. Glancing around, she tried to find the teen so she could let him down from whatever he was doing. Wait, was he on the robot's shoulder? He was. Standing braced to the neck of the zero-pointer, he was shoulder-deep in what looked like a maintenance panel, sparks flying as he sabotaged it. Yanking back, he came away with a length of cable wrapped around his arm, and the robot began to shudder, sparks shooting from several joints as it seized up and shifted awkwardly, one arm suddenly falling limp and dragging the robot across the intersection away from her as it swung its head back and forth. Worried, she focused on the teen to see him swinging around from the top of the head, anchored by the cord in his left hand, while a long blocky shape was pulled from under his large jacket with his right, two straps showing it had clearly been cinched tight to his frame under the concealing outfit. But the profile was unmistakable. Grabbing the frame of the zero-pointer's face, the green-haired teen swung around and landed, feet braced and wide, as the double-barreled shotgun in his hand was leveled dead center with the largest of the lenses adorning the robot's head. In the sudden silence, the world quieting as things seemed to slow, the teen said one thing, "Beach." And then the roar of the shotgun blast and shattering glass echoed through the intersection. And then the back of the robot began to spark, and smoke billowed out of it. "What the actual F-?" Ochako whispered, watching the teen leap from the robot even as it collapsed, limbs losing energy as it slumped, the green-haired teen sliding the shotgun into his jacket with comfort even under the effects of zero gravity, spinning as he coasted away from the now seizure-ridden robot. Remembering that she was the one doing that, she clapped her hands, the teen dropping the last half-foot and shaking out his left arm. He paced his way towards her and held out a hand. Face softened slightly, and an air of contentment around him. "Thanks for the assist. Name's Midoriya Izuku." Suddenly it clicked. She knew exactly who this was. Uraraka Ochako. "Are you the simulation guy?" she panted, trying to fight back rising nausea. Smirking, he slid his hands in his pockets, as behind him the zero-pointer tilted over, crashing to the ground. "I might be." And then she puked on his boots. Simulation, survival. Day hour 2 hours 12 minutes and 11 seconds. Izuku gasped as he shot up from the white sheets, hand coming up to his neck. Flashes of memory filled him. A needle, manic blue eyes, the underpass, the rough grip of LTX around his neck. Instead of the comforting room he was used to, with its colorful posters and hero worship clear, this room was brutal in its simplicity. The bed was larger than he was used to, with a dark gray comforter and white sheets and pillows. The walls of the room were sheer concrete and lit by bars of a recessed white light. A desk was to his left and, halfway across the floor, gray carpet from under the bed gave way to white, square tile. An open doorway to the far right led into an open space with a tiled wall, and across from the bed on the far wall was what looked like a closet, with curved metal panels acting as doors. Finally, was a metal door to his left. Speaking of, he glanced down to see that somehow he was dressed in black loose slacks and a white t-shirt with a green stripe from the collar down over the heart to the waist. Scrambling, he got out of bed and moved to glance in the tiled room, revealing a bathroom with a shower, before darting to the closed door and looking at it. To his side was a green button. Tentatively, he pressed it, only for the door to open. Before him, a large high-ceilinged area stretched out. Brutalist was his first thought. Large pale concrete expanses for walls and floors. With a glass floor over complex computer electronics in the center, around a raised podium with a reclined seat on it. The far walls were a massive bank of windows, with a pale white glare filtering through the glass that blocked out any view past it, leaving only the faintest shape of buildings and streets out beyond the room. However, in the center of that wall, the room extended out into what looked like an office area. Desk, laptop, and high-backed chair. Where am I? On the desk, a ringing began. Suddenly Izuku felt nervous. This was creepy. He glanced around and tried to find another way out, but besides an opening leading to a kitchen area, a glass conference table with a series of chairs around it, and several scattered white couches. What would All Might do? Taking a deep breath, he turned and tried to march for the desk, though the clash of his stern march with his short and thin stature was comical, to say the least. He looked for the phone, only to see the screen of the computer flashing with an incoming call logo. Tapping enter, the screen went black, before snapping on to show the caller. Long red hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and skin shallow and pale stretched around thick black-rimmed glasses. Hello, Mr. Midoriya. Pleasure to see you've awakened. Where am I? Why am I here? What is going on? Izuku shouted, voice cracking from stress. Lips parted to reveal straight white teeth. Well, that's quite simple. You are currently inside a computer. Not just any computer either, no, this is a high-tech prototype. The first and possibly only of its time. I call it the simulation drive. Your body has been turned to data, and you have been uploaded into the drive. What you see is a complex rendering of a location. In reality, you are in a computer. Izuku froze. In a computer, he blinked and the words just didn't make sense. There were plenty of stories fiction about such a thing, but for it to happen in real life? It was too absurd even with quirks. See, my dream for 3 decades now has been to create a way to enter a digital world. I've researched and designed and tested for quite some time, and just as my prototype came to completion, I was fired. My research was taken, locked away, but I managed to keep the prototype. I've been testing it, but I keep running into a problem, you see. Izuku wanted to scream, to shout. But the words just kept bouncing inside his skull as he stared at the screen in horror. Quirks. The power of the people. Break the simulation. They are unpredictable, untracked variables. The simulation can't keep up with them. Not quite. So I needed a new target, a new tester, someone quirkless. Someone with a dream. See, I've heard of your dilemma. You wish to be a hero. Well, I offer you the greatest training possible. The simulation has 9 games. Classics from early in the millennia that the system has revamped and used to form its own simulated tests and environments. All you have to do to leave is complete all 9 games. Each has its own lessons, its own changes and challenges. But fear not, the world is on your side. As you run through the games, as the simulations play out around you, the world can watch you perform. And who knows, you may even end up with some very useful advice. Izuku felt himself go limp and crashed to the chair heavily, bouncing gently off its springs as he tried to process. Now I must leave you. I'll be watching. The glasses came off to reveal pale blue eyes. Good luck, have fun. The screen turned back, and Izuku stared at it before he. But ISCK at video games. Inko looked up as the door clicked and opened smoothly. Her heart jumped at the sight of her son, even as part of her ached at what he had to deal with. She heard the screams at night, had seen the flinching early in the morning before he had fully awakened. Beyond that, have you eaten? She asked, even as Izuku's eyes tracked through the room and he relaxed ever so slightly, sliding the tall case from his shoulder, but still holding it with a tight hand. Not really. Sorry, Ma. And he really did look sorry. More than that, he looked disappointed in himself. She could almost read his mind as his shoulders slumped, that familiar air of self-disgust. None of that attitude, She reached up and rubbed a hand across his cheek. Still startled by the fact that her son, who had barely reached her height before the simulation, was now several inches taller than her. Like she expected, angry tears welled beneath her thumb. "So you didn't eat? Did you sleep well? How was the exam?" He smiled. "Slept a few hours. The exam was strange. Familiar." He looked down, eyes closed. "It felt like I was back there, and it was easy to slip back into the mindset," he murmured, and Inko felt her heart break. His therapist had approved him joining UA. It was, after all, prepared to help people cope with the same things her beautiful, dangerous, broken son dealt with. Trauma, guilt, stress, things that the general public would villainize him for. Inko was many things, but ignorant of her son's experience was not one of them. She had forced herself to watch, to understand Izuku's habits. His reflexes and skills and instincts had been changed. The slightest triggers, the most vague of warnings. He worked on overdrive. His doctors referred to it as if he had reverted to a primal state of mind. In a way he had. He'd been forced to begin with the very basics. To build off of the most fundamental ideas. Of action, reaction, and focus. Pulling slightly at her son's head, she gave him a kiss on the cheek. "I'll go put some tea and dinner on. Do what you need to while I do." She stepped away, and Izuku wandered to the living room table, setting his case down and opening it while she moved away from the scene. Even from the kitchen, she could hear the click and rasp of metal being disassembled. Then the faint rustle of cloth over metal. She didn't like the fact her son was armed. That he had a gun, purchased and approved with UA's entrance exam. Both she and UA had been clear. Unless he was actively on patrol or in UA testing grounds, his gun was filled with non-lethal options. From the beanbag rounds for his shotgun, to the custom clips of rubber bullets he had in his handgun. As the clicking resumed, she waited as the tea boiled before her. And then the whetstone came out. And Izuku began to sing. She knew it was a side effect of the ambience in which he learned his blade. Of long hours and days under smoke-filled and dead skies, of camping in sewers and sitting around bonfires while the demons of the night came and went. Izuku's song was wordless. There was no language in his actions. No word or story. Instead it was a haunting melody of deep echoing breaths and sharp syllabistic hissing. He had explained, the first time she heard it, that it was a counterpoint to the background music of the 9th game. A way to meet the melody and draw out the monsters he stalked. A way to keep time and control his breathing in the flow of combat. As the tea steeped, she could only listen with tears as her child sung. Simulation, hour 3 hours 11 minutes and 12 seconds. Izuku sat and stared at what the instructions on the computer called the simulation chair, the blue and white of its design doing nothing to keep the aura of menace it extruded from him. "I have to, right? I should wait, let the heroes respond and come for me, but what if they don't?" The muttering filled the room, Izuku's eyes locked on the chair as he focused. Finally, he breathed deep and pushed off the white chair he was perched on and slowly walked to the simulation chair. Breathing deep, he shifted and lay on it, his small form perfectly conforming to the curve of the seat. As he lay back, a clear white circular visor slid out and around his head, before starting. 9 labels appeared before him, but all but one was blank. "What is Slender?" The word left his lips, and the world turned white. When it faded back in, he stood in a forest, the trees reaching up and into the dark sky. Izuku was sitting with a flashlight on his lap. Before him, a white screen with black text appeared. "Collect 100 pages, before the Slender Man catches you. Record 0100. For a moment Izuku could only stare in confusion, before a deep static hiss began to echo from the forest. He could hear it, a faint almost imperceptible hiss that slowly grew louder as the menu shrunk. A beep from his wrist drew his attention, a watch he didn't previously have displaying a counter of time, 0:00:21, and pages 0 as he watched the time tick on. He looked up at the darkness around him. And then the hissing sound grew louder. "Oh, God." He turned, looking through the trees around him for some hint of a path or direction. As he looked behind him, he blinked, And there, in the distance, a spot of pale color in the night. He squinted, focusing as he tried to take it in. It was a person? He blinked, and suddenly, far closer than it was, the shape had moved. Here he could see more. A head, pale and blank. A black suit, and long misshapen limbs. The static moved louder, and Izuku flinched, only to see the figure had closed almost a third of the distance, and that now he could make out the way the form shifted and flickered as he focused on it. Yeah. Nope. Turning, Izuku took off through the woods at a sprint. As the static faded in and out, his panic only grew. Do you have your badge? Handkerchief? Tissues? Notebooks? Inko worried her hands and glanced around even as Izuku looked up, a black single-strap courier bag on the table as he slid the last few bits of gear away. I got it, he called out, giving a soft, strained smile. He had been preparing for over a week, ever since his acceptance letter had arrived. Congratulations. You have passed the UA entrance exam with flying colors. Izuku lowered the gun, breathing deeply and lifting the gun up in an effort to calm himself as the holographic image of a small mammal in a suit paused, before continuing its speech. Your exceptional combat skills, as well as your initiative and awareness in saving a fellow student and taking out a massive local threat, means you pass with the second highest score of this year's examinees. A screen appeared, names and numbers denoting scores scrolling down. He focused on the first two though. Katsuki Bakugo, 77 villain points, 0 rescue points. Midoriya Izuku, 54 villain points, 20 rescue points. Now, I know of your recent experiences and trials, particularly of this last year, and would like to assure you, we at UA are ready and willing to help you any way we must. But you must come to us if you have issues. We also remind you that part of your admittance is that you must speak to a registered and approved therapist. Please come in a day early for us to finalize details as we go. Izuku nodded absently, already pulling a pen and noting that down on the cluttered desk of notes and reminders. With that out of the way, I would like to welcome you to UA. This is your Hero Academia. Izuku blinked, dismissing the memory. Shrugging the bag up and over his back, it fits snugly against and around the white sword bag tied with a red and gold fusahimo. The emblem of a yellow sun with reaching red beams was painted painstakingly across the center of the bag. A recognition of the NPC who originally taught Izuku the basics of swordplay. At the thought, an image flashed to mind. White tunic and steel, flashing in the weak light of a dying sun. Pushing it away, he tightened his bag to keep it from moving and headed for the door. Izuku. He paused. I'm proud of you. You know, for coming back to me, after everything. Izuku felt his heart clench. I know. It's hard. That you aren't the same. But I am so proud of you. I know that you will be an amazing hero. Izuku, hands steady, opened the door. Thanks, Mum. Twin tear tracks traced down his cheeks, but he made not a sound as he left the apartment. He was at the base of the stairs soon enough, exiting onto the street and looking up at the bright and lively sun. His eyes were dry. He heaved a sigh and set his shoulders, hands pulling his earbuds from his pockets even as his eyes focused ahead of him. Looking up, his thoughts wandered back to the examiner from the entrance exam. Plus Ultra. I can get behind that. In his eyes, an old spark flickered. Bakugo leaned against the wall on a cold street corner, one hand in his pocket and scarf around his neck. On his phone was a video. Just one part of a story among many. He had headed out from the house to get away from his nag of a mother for a few hours. He tapped play. Green eyes and hair filled the center of the screen, hands up with a handgun in one and a flashlight in the other. Sure and steady steps. A flash of light playing over ornate wallpaper and crown molding even in his gun slowly waved back and forth around the room. To the side of the image, the scroll of the chat, live at the time of the video recording, showed plenty of comments about being careful, or that the character needed to get a move on. A whistle and a shambling step signaled a new figure. Black slacks and a once white shirt, now stained with blood and pus, leaned around the corner, half-dead eyes looking up past a white film as they tracked to the teen's light, the pupils not even twitching as the light met them. Two bangs rang out, an eye vanishing in an explosion of gore, even as the mouth did the same. Black and red flesh blew across the wall behind it, the corpse collapsing to the ground slowly. The green-haired figure moved closer and stomped down, smashing the neck into paste with repeated kicks and solid boots even as the beam light danced around the room, the teen on high alert. As the head separated from the body, he stopped and glanced around. Green eyes caught the light with a manic glint, visible even through the screen as they stared out from a face covered with flecks of blood. I really hate this FNG mansion. Breathing deep, Bakugo paused the video there and closed the full screen, a flash of the video's title coming up. The Simulation, game recorded live, October 6th. Katsuki breathed out as the phone was slid away. 9 months and change. What did you become, nerd? Simulation, hour 3 hours 43 minutes and 27 seconds. Slender. Sheet. Izuku chanted as he booked it, the fourth page already fading away in flakes of white dust in his hand as static once more filled his ears, deafening him. He kept catching glances, bits and pieces from the corner of his vision, a pale face flickering in the moonlight of the trees. Suddenly he tripped. A root was raised, just high enough to catch his ankle, and a flash of sharp hot pain shot through him as he crashed into the ground, the flashlight bouncing and skittering away. He gasped in pain, his ankle feeling wrong. He groaned and shifted, trying to stand, only to scream in pain and collapse, tears welling in his eyes as the fire in his nerves took his breath away, leaving him gasping and shuddering. Fighting to lift his torso up so he was leaning against a tree, he glanced at his ankle. In the pale moonlight, he could see pale, glistening blood and white bone. He screamed. Izuku was not fond of cars. At all. Trains were better. The rhythm, the control. They were on a rail, the path clear by default, and usually had a simple, if unorthodox, exit. Cars were loud, chaotic, and driven by people who seemed perfectly ignorant of how bad they drove. And getting out was far more of a hassle, 'cause there were other cars to deal with. Hiking his jacket's lapels higher, he breathed through the faux fur of the collar and shook his head. A hand in his pocket traced the familiar shape of his phone, tapping the subtle buttons on the side, and the music in his ears loudened. He had been working his way through years of music, going backwards in genre and release dates during his time in the simulation, and taking deep joy in finding his preferred tunes. Deep guitar and drums. Things with passion, with rage, with defiance. Things he could relate to. From early millennium punk rock, through the neo-pop punk of the early 2100s to the revival of classic death and hair metal that ran through America and parts of Japan just a few decades ago. The music was also probably one of the only reasons he passed his English comprehension exam to get in UA, since he didn't get much help with talking in the simulation. All the other NPC and mobs spoke Japanese, despite the locations of several of the games. Sighing softly, not that it was audible or visible behind the high collar of his cloak and the unmoving set of his shoulders as he leaned in the corner of the train car, he let the music flow through him. I'm gonna fight 'em all. A seven-nation army couldn't hold me back. He let his eyes flutter half-closed, trying to block out just how painfully aware of the world he still was. They're gonna rip it off. Taking their time right behind my back. There, 3 rows behind him, the girl with vines for hair was biting her lip, and he could hear the faint hiss of a muttered prayer as she scowled at her phone. She had a haptic feedback option on, the faint beep and hum of her button presses audible. It was harder to not instantly process what she was typing. That would be rude. And I'm talking to myself at night because I can't forget. The 3 businessmen standing near the doors are talking finances. They work together and are friends, but one of them is nervous. A tick of tapping his fingers on his suitcase latch. Cheating? Flustered? Izuku shoved the thoughts away before they could confirm themselves, breathing deep as he tried to focus on the music. Back and forth through my mind, behind a cigarette. Izuku's eyes met with that of the blonde teen sitting sprawled out on the far side of the car. The black streaks in the shape of a lightning bolt were a giveaway, as was the faint feel of static electricity on the air. Natural, complementary mutation related to Quirk. Electric user recognizes me. And the message coming from my eyes. The door rings. This stop is one too soon, but he can walk and he was early anyway. He's out the door in 3 seconds flat, the faint sound of the teen scrambling slightly behind him. By the time the other teen reaches the door and looks out, the green-haired survivor was long gone. Says leave it alone. Simulation, hour 3 hours 50 minutes and 27 seconds. Slender. Izuku screamed again as he tried to reach down and push his bone back into place, eyes flashing white and black from the pain surging through him. When he opened his eyes, he couldn't hear his screams. All he could hear was static, as the featureless pale face leaned over him, see the sharp black suit underneath, the unrealistically tall proportions. And then suddenly the face wasn't a smooth white plane. Its pale skin, once marble smooth, began to writhe and distend, long rigid shapes pushing and twisting before its white facade began to rip and tear, carving pitch black and bright bloody red lines. Long lines stretching like loose stitching, revealing teeth and eyes and teeth. So much pain. Ripping. Teeth and flesh, in the throat even as thick and ice-cold tendrils circles limbs and began to pull. Bone cracking with fireworks and explosions of pain that wiped away thought and action and left only the static fire of agony. And then the world faded away and he knew nothing more. Run terminated by user death. Resetting avatar to safe room. Death count. Izuku woke up screaming. The gates of UA stood open and, fingering the thin white and blue card in his pocket, Izuku crossed it, his senses slowly shifting and pinging off his surroundings. It's quieter than the street behind him, only a sparse half-dozen people in his range of awareness. Most of them are students, sitting and conversing in shade of the trees or lounging in the courtyard of the building. Walking up to the gleaming gateway of UA, he reaches down and lowers the volume of his earbuds once more, running fingers through his bangs as he slouches, minimizing his profile as he paces up the steps of the front door of UA. A glance at a nearby evacuation map as he passes the corner all but burns the layout of the building into his mind, and instead of talking to the secretary at the front desk, he turns and follows his deep-seated understanding, the faint draw to an objective he knew so well. Nedzu, the headmaster. Office should be near the teacher's lounge, upper floor. Best angle over the outer wall. It's a matter of minutes for him to follow the draw. A sign pointing to the teacher's lounge, an elevator with a card scanner and a teachers only sign. The mental map of where the high ground is. He steps out on the top floor of the wing and walks towards the front of the building, eyes catching on the dark hair and red glasses of someone walking his way, her face mostly hidden behind a stack of papers but the costume distinctive all the same. Midnight. 18 plus heroin. Boy knockout. Distance is key. Gas is skin originated. Abuse pres and cure. Not enemy. Relax. Focus past her. Izuku focused past her and down the hall, watching as the tension left and the world seemed to click back into motion as he finished his assessment. He made it past her and blinked at the faint smell, sweet, almost like candy or sugar, but not the acrid burnt sugar smell of nitroglycerin that comes from Bakugu. The residue of the gas maybe? Something to consider. He finally came to a stop at the door he was looking for. The Principal Nedzu nameplate confirming his intuition and giving impetus to a twitched lip. Something that might be a smirk if it was exaggerated a bit more. Letting the emotion fade back under his shell, he reached up and knocked. Nedzu sipped at his tea as he watched the green-haired teen navigate the building, seemingly on instinct and vague guesses. The alert he had programmed to let him know when the young and recognizable form of Midoriya Izuku passed the gate with his ID card had gone off, the cameras focusing on the green-haired teen walking to the building with a calm and even gait. More interesting was how the teen acted inside the building. Beyond a quick glance, the teen didn't even bother with the secretary, opting to wander himself. Signs of a lack of trust in authority, perhaps? The only time that Midoriya-san's relaxed state was broken was in the hallway outside Nedzu's office. When he passed by midnight, Nedzu had watched in interest as muscles had tensed and empty eyes locked on the overburdened hero, the lines of his back and shoulders shifting to show readiness, before slowly unclenching as they passed. Interesting. Something in you recognized the danger of midnight in a fight, even if you weren't planning to fight her. An instinctive response to strength and skill? Was it something about her that set it off? How curious, Nedzu remarked even as he began to tidy up, a new pot for tea being set on the heater as he closed out his surveillance app. A knock rang out from the door. "Come in, Mr. Midoriya." The door swung open, and Midoriya walked in, one hand tucked into the jacket and the other hanging loosely at his side. "Principal Nedzu?" he asked, though he softened his intonation of the question. They both knew who each other was. Nedzu grinned. "Simulation, hour 4 hours 23 minutes and 20 seconds. Izuku shuddered once more, sitting half-naked in the bright utilitarian shower, the water above him, fake, it's all fake, pouring down steaming hot, the heat pulsing through his skin, torn, ripped and shredded, and oh god it hurt. As he shivered and clutched tightly at unmarred flesh. Slender. The word, so innocent, so uninteresting. Now it felt like poison in his mind, on his tongue, curling around his limbs and lungs and up his spine. Pale fingers pressing tight and digging into his muscles with terrifying force. It had felt so real. As he sat there, the sound of a click made him look up, the sound striking a chord of memory, the echo of school announcements and the soft static of an intercom. "Oh, poor number 9. Look at you. Look at that face, that fear. Oh, you are wonderful, a perfect experiment." The chill deepened, but something in Izuku shifted. Slightly. Barely coming into alignment. "I can't wait to see you break and forge into your perfect self." Loosely clenched hands began to tighten, nails. Digging into the flesh of his palms. "That break?" "But sadly, you can't seem to wake up, to get moving, and while I would love to walk you through, it's time for little boys to grow up. So here's your choice, you either resume your attempts at the simulation, or I stop sending you back to this nice little break area when you die. You have 2 hours to decide." Fear began to make him shake. The fear of death, an endless undying existence, was never something he considered, but now it paralyzed him except for the shaking, uncontrollably shivering that he felt. "And of course, if all else fails, I always track down and test your mother." The shivering stopped cold. A click, then silence. For 1 minute. And then, slowly the shape shifted. A hand, knuckles pale and dripping red running out from shallow gouges across its palm, reached out from the waterlogged mass that was huddled still and silent. From under plastered dark green hair that shimmered like oil on water, 2 eyes gleamed out, filled not with anything as ethereal as hope or joy. These eyes held, for the first time in his young life, hate. True unfiltered hate. Prove him wrong. Silently, he rose from the shower, hands reaching up and peeling his soaked clothes off as he strode unsteadily towards the closet, grabbing a towel as he began to roughly scrub the water from his form. Take everything he has ever made. He had never realized how heavy hate could be. It wasn't that clenched tight fear that wrapped his bones. It wasn't the deep chill of a death reversed that had clung to his lungs and pulse. Take his dream. No, this was a heavy, hot weight. Take his mind. It slid down his throat, taking his words with it. His soul. It settled in his gut, sinking into his stomach and heart with a deep, heavy hum. And burn it to the ground. A snarl, something animalistic, something goddamn primal exploded from his throat. Hands shoved in the closet and searched through clothes as part of him burst into action. His mind, no longer paralyzed, looked at his options and discarded many out of hand. Too heavy, too loose, too easy to grab, not warm enough. He pulled a long-sleeved, thick black shirt with a green diamond pattern across the arms. Black jeans, stretchy and thick to the touch. A jacket, tan and heavy and with that smell of leather and oil. Boots. Solid-soled and high-topped. Bright red that seemed like a joke, like a goddamn concession to his style. He shoved them on, damp hair pushed back from eyes to reveal a wild glint in them. He slammed his fist on the door's button, a sharp stomp and stride to the podium. The screen barely came alive when he swore the word. Slender. And with that he appeared in the forest, rage thumping in his chest. He wanted Izuku to break? That. As the first undercurrent of static began, Izuku was already running, boots thumping through the grass as the flashlight clicked on. The world seemed etched in black and white, the thumping blood and his anger in his chest chasing the cold of the forest away. He was going to find his way out of this simulation. He was going to track down who put him here. And then he was going to beat the a-hole who threatened his mom to death with his bare hands. Izuku nursed his cup of tea, letting the aroma calm him. Across from him, Nezu did the same. They had spoken softly for a while now. Pleasantries and idle gossip. Part of him found comfort in this. It was soft and quiet, and Nezu was polite enough not to mention the fact he had cased the entire room 4 times, had frozen up twice when bad memories had hit him, and had been fairly useless in providing any sort of current gossip. However, as he now finished his 4th cup of tea, and Nezu set his 5th aside, the tone began to change. So, as you are aware, Mr. Midoriya, we have several topics to cover before your paperwork can be finalized? I understand. I would have concerns as well. Izuku looked down and felt his lips quirk in a smirk somewhere between sarcastic and resigned. First, I believe, is the topic of therapy. As part of the ongoing recovery process you are engaged in, Hound Dog will be taking over for your therapy sessions. Considering that you've gone through 4 other therapists in a very short month of meetings, that's been far easier than we expected. The paperwork was finalized yesterday, and both of you will have scheduled meetings twice a week. That's more than acceptable. Please don't break Hound Dog. I will endeavor not to. Nezu gave a gimlet start with a spark of humor at the cagey response, but let it drop. Second, you need to outfit yourself with non-lethal options, as well as speak with a support agent. Power Loader has thankfully volunteered and will be available after our meeting. As per the court agreement about lethal force in the hands of heroes and training 74 years ago, you need to have a non-lethal variant of any weaponry you use with any regularity. From guns to swords to explosives. We have a few designs prepped for your inspection, and if I remember, you had a request for something special. Yeah. A tool from the games. I figure I have enough know-how to get it working, even if only barely. Wonderful. And I suppose you'll also want an input on your weapon's final designs. Izuku merely nodded, eyes drifting to the sun sigil of the blade bag resting against the wall. There's a few memories I would rather not tarnish. He didn't look at Nezu, letting the principal make his own judgment without his input. Of course. From there it was merely minutiae. A clarification on a few relevant rules, a bit of a modification to a few time PRDS, and a note in his files that he was currently suffering from several traumas and a list of responses for if he was particularly unstable. And with that I do believe our agreement is finalized. If you do have issues or requests, my door is often open. Though I would prefer you check with the secretary next time. Nezu called out once more as Izuku stood and headed for the door, slinging his blade back across his shoulders. Your secretary needs better sightlines if you want that to happen, Izuku mused, a sardonic twitch of the shoulders all but shouting his amusement to the headmaster. As the door closed, the two parted. Simulation. Day 6 hours 7 hours 23 minutes and 20 seconds. Death count, 43. Fuck you. Izuku flipped off the flickering form of Slender as he dove from the roof, the reaching white hands recoiling in what looked like anger and frustration as Izuku grunted and rolled off a window awning and slammed onto a car roof, hand triumphantly holding one of the more annoying pages, the white paper flaking away as his counter ticked up from 89 to a week. A week of running and exploring and grabbing those goddamn papers. His initial rage had long since cooled and banked under the sheer frustration and exhaustion he felt. Beyond that, he still felt cold and sore from his simulated deaths. Each one had been immensely painful, the feeling of torn flesh and burrowing tendrils echoing when he tried to relax. His kind demeanor and his smile had been ripped away due to the effort it took to maintain. Pain and anger, and his hate was now focused and loud, augmented by years of insults learned from bullies and his childhood friend, and expressed on the most immediate target. That pale motherfucker. The forest he had first appeared and died in was only part of what had to be a 5-kilometer to a side square, surrounded by a sheer 5-meter-tall smooth wall. In this was a forest, a place that looked like a small rural town, and a series of complexes and industrial locations that appeared almost copy-pasted. But the papers were what really set him off. He had learned quickly that while there were set locations for the papers to spawn, there were far more locations than there were papers, and placement was randomized. Beyond that, some of the pages were placed in some annoying locations. Ledges outside windows, stuck on top of flagpoles, pinned inside cars, hanging from roof awnings. Izuku had to learn, quickly, how to take a fall and get the highest and farthest leaps he could, often ending runs with broken legs and shattered arms as Slender closed in. His neck still ached some days from the memory of falling off a roof head first and not surviving. As he rolled off the car, biting back a groan as he felt his back begin to bruise from the impact, he took off running. 90 pages. Already cleared the south half of the forest, the farmstead, and the city. That leaves the industrial complex. 10 more pages. Just 10 more. Boots on concrete echoed as he ran down the center of the street, arms pumping as he kept low. A hiss of static from his right and he dodged, long white arms swinging from around the corner of a truck, Izuku's eyes meeting the blank face as a white fingertip caught his shoulder, leaving deep bloody gashes in his. Hissing through his teeth, Izuku twisted out of reach, eyes darting back ahead of him as he lowered his torso and dug deep, sprinting down the street. The static once more filled his ears, and he bit back a curse as the flickering form of Slender shifted ahead of him. Oh F you. Running forwards, Izuku dodged once more, dancing past, before diving into the forest. Hearing the beginning of a scream that seemed composed of overlapping static sounds. 10 pages. Just 10 more. Izuku stepped down the fairly barren hall of the support wing of the building, feeling that slow tension build in his bones. There wasn't a threat, he knew that. But the signs on the walls that talked about safety rules and regulations. As his eyes roved over them, he could feel the memories creep back in. There had been a few places where warnings like these were next to dangerous things. And for a moment he could hear the monstrous screams echoing down metal hallways. And then he shook his head, dispersing the memory. Eventually, his footsteps took him to the door he was looking for. Power Loader was written in large letters across the door plaque. He knocked, some part of him tensing, waiting for a response. Doors open, come on in, came a muffled yell from behind the door, and Izuku complied, pushing through the doorway. The clean, empty designs of the hall vanished as he stepped into a classroom of desks, the far wall replaced by a rolling garage door that was opened into what must have been the support labs. At the desk across the classroom area, a shorter man dressed in a blue and white mechanic's jumpsuit stood with a tablet in hand. His face was exposed, but his eyes were hidden by the loose curtain of bright orange hair that hung almost to his shoulders. Eyes darting, Izuku glanced at his hands, spotting the bright iron gleam of his fingertips. I was told you were expecting me? Power Loader shifted, a pale blue eye glancing up through his bangs as he took in Izuku. Yes. Nedza mentioned you needed some gear. He said you had a few ideas? Oh, and ignore the mess. One of our new students has gotten a head start on using the facilities. Power Loader led the way through the garage door into the crowded workshop, past piles of half-assembled pieces of gear and robot components. In the corner, a half-disassembled arm that looked awfully like that of the zero-pointer hung from the roof. Looks busy, Izuku commented, eyes clocking corners and checking angles even as he wandered behind the teacher, hands tensing and flexing in his jacket pockets. Yeah. The start of year resupply and fix-up. New materials, tools, and general supplies come in, and I spend several weeks running the new kids through basic doctrine on the remains of the entrance exam robots. Saves me time and the school money. As they turned a corner around a 10-foot-tall stack of sheet metal, the still mostly clean back end of the shop came into view. Sparks flew from behind a divider. To the side, but Izuku focused on the large, slowly spinning holographic blueprints of a zero-pointer floating in the center of the space. Realizing he should say something, he spoke up. Cool. Indeed it is. Now, you have files for me to use as a base. Nodding, Izuku reached up and held out a thumb drive. Wonderful. Now, let's see about getting you that equalizer you asked for. The thumb drive was plugged in, and the zero-pointer design vanished. A few taps on the tablet and a list of files appeared. Each was opened, 3D models of every weapon appearing in the air. Each one was specific dimensions and weights, all modified and adjusted. The digital models of things that he had recovered from the computers he was trapped in. Izuku's eyes glanced over, past the 3 guns designs floating next to him and the teacher, and beyond the half-designed suit of armor pieces he had been pulling together from a set of files over the last month. Instead, he focused on the last 2 weapons, specifically the smaller one which was far more detailed than the simple blade across his back. Floating, it looked simple, but he could see the details. Embossed symbols and carefully wrapped leather. A worn blade, but solid. Durable. On the pommel, the sun emblem gleamed. Just looking at it he could almost hear the shout. Jolly cooperation. Well now, the guns are easy enough. I can print and fabricate the parts here, though I'll need to register them and you. Snipe owes me a favor for that. As for the armor, it needs some work. I'm betting it goes with your hero suit. Yeah. And the last 2. I know of a guy who can get that sword worked out, but it'll take some time. That half-butted hunk of junk you got gonna last that long. Izuku grimaced, remembering how he had literally ground it out of a bar of steel and that the edge was already chipping. It's poor quality, but it'll last for a few weeks if I don't stress it. Nodding, the hero leaned in at the last item. More specifically the digital notes attached that floated near it. Sheesh. That's one hell of design modification. Gonna take me some time to get that worked. Oh, you? I can do that. The hero jumped, while Izuku's eyes merely shifted and rested on the girl he had felt coming up next to him. Bright cross-haired gold eyes and braided pink hair focused on the holograms, before darting his way with tangible excitement. I can help set most of this up, I know how. Damn it, girl, make some noise. And you're not in class yet. Power Loader turned on the girl as he recovered from the surprise. But I can help while you finish the class schedule, the roster placement, and the 32 orders you need to supervise. I can handle the armor and the modified weapon. Power Loader folded his arms, blue eyes glaring at gold from underneath his auburn hair, before flicking to Izuku. That up to you, kid. You're the client. You get a say here. The girl rounded, blinking as gold met green. A long moment of silence, Izuku gazing at her and keeping a blank face, while she slowly began to fidget under his cool gaze. Finally, he swung his hand from his pocket, holding it out. Midoriya Izuku. And you? She jumped and blinked before smacking her hand into his and shaking excitedly. Hatsume. Oh, nice to meet my new support tech. I trust you to keep up, he grinned as the girl's eyes flashed with an inner fire. She would do just fine. Simulation. Day 6 hour 8 hours 2 minutes and 11 seconds. Death count, 43. Izuku's breath was a death rattle, blood dripping from behind his teeth as he staggered one more step. He could see it. Across from him, on a car door where it was parked in the middle of the dirt road that crossed the clearing. Page 100. He wasn't going to make it. He glanced back, wincing as the sheer act made him dizzy, eyes latching on the dark stains that lingered amidst the grass and across trees. Blood loss and exhaustion. He had been so close. But then Slender stopped hunting him, stopped following and waiting for him, and started playing with him. He could feel the burn of the claw marks that stretched across his back and around his sides, feel the warm rivers of blood that cooled and glued cloth to skin. He staggered and collapsed, trying to brace himself before he hit the ground, but with only his left arm still attached and his right arm reduced to a bloody stump, he wasn't able to stop himself. He hit the ground with a choked-off scream and a spray of blood from his mouth. Something broke when I hit that tree. It's getting harder and harder to breathe. Lungs. The static was still there, on the edge of his perception, but instead of the incomprehensible drone it once was, now it rose and fell sharply. Slender was laughing. The white hand appeared, skin writhing as it reached down and almost gently caressed his cheek. He closed his eyes, trying to force back the well of hopelessness and rage that burned in him, mixing with the haze of pain and blood loss. And then he choked, the hand tight around his throat as he was yanked up, breathing stopped as his throat struggled against the cool stone-like grip. His eyes shot open, just in time to see the pale face writhe and begin to split. Millions of small writhing teeth. Death count, 44 chapter text. Tenya glanced around, taking in the early morning as he paced himself towards the still quite astonishing shape of Yua, feeling his chest tighten in pride and excitement at the fact he was on his way to making his brother proud of him. With pride and vigor, he pushed through the gate and the front doors. With confident steps, he passed through the halls, having already memorized the UA floor plan to find his class. Class 1A. He took in the gleaming tile of the halls, the bold and clean walls and structures, and smiled. And then he reached his classroom and paused. The door was cracked open, but the room beyond had the lights off, only the faint gleam of the morning sun lighting the room from within. Blinking, he marched up and glanced through, leaning past the threshold in curiosity. The light-on-dark contrast of the room cast details in shadow, but he could see that on the windowsill, the glass panels shoved open to let in the morning light and air, a young teen sat. For a moment, Tenya took in the familiar clean-cut shape of the UA male uniform and a hair of loose, lanky green curls that hung down past the teen's eyes, gleaming in the sunlight. His uniform was clean and well-pressed, though with a red bow tie instead of a necktie. Beyond that, what caught his eye was the blade at his side, clasped to a utility belt stretched over his costume. For a split second, his mind ran through the rules, and even as he was recognizing the teen, he was moving arms up and gesturing as he eyed the teen in the window. His quirks speeding him up, he passed through the classroom in less than a second, shouting loudly as he approached. "Swords are not allowed in a classroom setting dash." He froze, breath caught and a cold sweat on his brow. The ground and sharpened point of the blade was resting just below his Adam's apple. Green eyes, suddenly dark and cold with the sunlight behind them to contrast, focused on Ida's red eyes. There was a glimmer of surprise, hidden among grim amusement and annoyance. "Don't shout. The sword is an exemption. Part of my condition to attend. Same with a variety of other gear." The blade, which Ida could now see had a thin metal attachment to blunt the edge, pulled away even as Ida swallowed, his throat suddenly very dry. He had seen the teen startle, but he barely caught the path of the blade as it was drawn back and then slammed forwards, up and under his guard, and around his half-raised arms. If it hadn't stopped, it would have killed him. "I apologize for my sudden assault and my volume." With the distance shortened, he could make out the teen's features, the pale skin and smattering of thick freckles across his cheeks clear as day. With the addition of that soft and ragged voice, Ida now recognized him as the boy from the entrance exam. "So he made it in here too. That don't charge me again and we'll be just fine." A flicker of motion, the faint sound of leather on steel, and the blade was sheathed once more. Crossing his arms loosely, the teen returned to staring out the window, and Ida could make out the front gate from where the teen sat. "Okay, let's try this again. My name is Ida Tenya. Pleased to make your acquaintance." He held out his hand to shake, and the teen glanced back, face half-shadowed in the lack of sun. A quick grasp, wrist to wrist, and a muttered name was all his response, before the green-haired teen looked away once more. Ida paused, sighed, and turned back to find a seat. "Midoriya Izuku, what a strange guy." Bakugo growled as he marched through the door to one, gaze darting from person to person even as he beelined to a familiar place, the dead center of the classroom. Close enough to hear and be heard by anyone else. He had already clocked everyone in the class, judging them all to be worthless. Tossing his bag under the seat, he crashed into it, focusing on the board and the door for the teacher and putting any thought of his classmates out of his mind. Or that was the plan. "Relax, Kakin. We got 5 minutes until the teacher shows." The words were offhand, the speaker barely talking and clearly not focused as Bakugo's head tilted, catching sight of dark hair and a pen as a textbook was slowly defaced behind him. Glancing back, he tried to stop grinding his teeth at the sudden feeling of danger behind him. 5 minutes to the dot later, as the last of the class nervously filed in, the door opened to a tall, lean man with a black jumpsuit, with a yellow bundle of some sort in his hand which he tossed behind the teacher's desk as he glanced around, eyebrow raised. Got quiet in 5 seconds. That's logical. Saves me time." He pulled a box out of his desk. "UA gym uniforms. Gyms on the first floor, follow me and change into them. We're testing you all before lunch. Sir? A boy with sharp teeth and red spiky hair raised his hand. What about orientation and the opening ceremony? I don't care for them. Pro heroes don't have time for pageantry like that. And students who want to be pro have even less. Get a move on. The class paused, but even as Bakugo scrambled to his feet, Deku had already darted past, feet silent on the tile in red high tops and his sword tucked and held close to avoid contact. By the time Katsuki was up, had his gym clothes, and had taken off after the teacher, Izuku was shadowing the taller man with a silent grace. 10 minutes later, he was still trying to adjust to the loose jumpsuit, and glancing around the field he and the rest of the class was standing in. Welcome to your Quirk assessment tests. Simulation, day 12 hour 13 hours and 41 minutes death count, 59. Izuku crouched, landing as he began the simulation once more. He had barely touched down, when his boots dug into the soft topsoil, and he shoved off. His flashlight was turned off and tossed in his pocket, never even turned on, his eyes already adjusting to the dark of the forest as he took a split second to orient himself in the map. Southwest. Not bad, could be better. Clear the forest first. His muttering was soft, barely perceptible in the dark forest. He caught the faintest echo of the sound of static, but he was already heading the way he needed to. In seconds, he saw the first page, pinned to a large tree in the middle of a clearing. He passed it and ripped it free without stopping, letting it float and dissolve in the clearing, even as he exited it on his way to his next stop. 1. The static picked up, ever so slightly. Izuku ignored it. He had pages to find. Uraraka glanced over at the teen who had helped her in the entrance exam. The softball in his hand. Bakugo's massive explosion, that girl, Yao, something, had flat out fired it from a cannon, and Ochako herself had floated it into space. She watched as the teen grabbed the ball in his offhand, tossing it gently as he drew his sword in his right. A toss to gauge the weight, another to get the feel of it, and on the third he tossed it far straight up, and as it fell he twisted, the blade coming around in two hands, the flat of the metal impacting the ball with a loud crack as it took off into the distance. 153 meters. Next. She blinked. The teacher wasn't gonna comment on Izuku's gear? Or his lack of quirk? Regardless, she shot a smile his way at the fact he was fairly middle of the pack in distance of the ball. Simulation, day 12 hour 14 hours 11 minutes and 3 seconds death count, 59. 14. The count was to keep track, to keep focused. 15. To distract from pain. To ignore fear. A burst of static, a reaching claw, and a duck. The static screeches behind him. His hands ripped through white paper once more. 16. Kirishima growled to himself, arms pumping up and down as he pushed himself to the limit. Hardening didn't help with this. If it was planks it would be great, but hardened muscles wouldn't make his actions smoother, wouldn't help him keep his arms pumping and blood flowing past the burn. Across from him, his partner for this test was doing the same, green hair tied loosely back in a knot above his scalp with a stray bit of leather cord, his sword just above his fingertips as the teen moved up and down in a smooth, consistent arc. No wasted motion, no uneven breathing, no hesitation. Kirishima had been trying to match that pace, but even now, almost 10 minutes into it, the two of them pushing up and down, he was more than a dozen counts behind, and falling more behind with every minute. 10 minutes are up. Counts. 312, sir. Kirishima bit out as he pushed himself to his feet, looking up to help. Only for the other teen to already be up and with his sword buckled at his side. 354. The F-dash? 42 more than me? So manly. But next. Simulation, day 12 hour 14 hours 56 minutes and 11 seconds death count, 59. Duck past the open window, so Slender can't reach out and grab him. Leap off the car hood, roof, and that awning to snag the one on the flagpole. 34. Use the flagpole to reach the roof and leap to the next building, snagging that one before Slender can reset to duck and roll, dropping to the lower part of the roof. Those fingers brushed past his hair, he could feel it. Ignore it though. Grab the next paper to clear the factory grounds. 35. Shoji grinned behind his face mask. The 540 kilograms was the highest score so far, and as he watched the green-haired teen step up, he expected to see maybe then a bracelet of paracord was undone, and several sharp twists later, the green-haired teen was pulling with his full body movement to tighten a noose around the sensor grips. Shoji had to admit, the ingenuity was great and the effectiveness was not to be doubted, considering the display read a score of 156 kilograms. But seriously, what was this kid's quirk? He hadn't seen it yet, and he had been paying attention to everyone this entire time. The eyes on his shoulders weren't for show, after all. Simulation, day 12 hour 15 hours, 35 minutes and 12 seconds death count, 59. F-. Izuku gazed at the next and last page in the city part of the map. A dead-end alley, with a concrete back wall. He glanced around and noted that Slender had vanished, but the sound of static was rising louder and louder. No choice. F-. He booked it down the alley, the sound of static beginning the goddamn laughter. Izuku reached the paper and tore it off, but did not stop moving. The wall was 12 feet tall, made of smooth brickwork with clean, smooth corners. But as he leapt, his boots caught on the surface, for just a second. Just long enough for his leg to kick off, for his body to rise, for that haunting laughter to change to a shriek of static rage as he grasped the top edge and with all his might, dragged himself up. The form of Slender appeared at the end of the alley, where he had apparently decided to trap and torment Izuku. 90, you motherfucker. And I know where the last 10 are already. He leapt across the rooftops as the static screech began to deafen him, ringing in his ears. There's only one place left to go. He stared off into the forest, the faint lights of the train yard of shipping containers bright and clear in the distance. Aizawa glanced at his clipboard as the second-to-last exercise, the long jump, came to a close. 12 laps, 5 kilometers endurance run. Go! With various groans of discontent, the mass of students lined up, and on his whistle took off. Some took the lead immediately. Bakugo Katsuki with a blast of force, Ida Tenya with a whir of engines and exhaust, and Yaoyorozu Momo on a solar bike she formed quickly. With Todoroki Shudo keeping pace on a path of ice as he skated along. But between the rest of them and the fastest, one could be seen pulling ahead of the pack of the slowest. Keeping pace and pulling ahead of the large leaps of Azuitsuyu and the sliding acid trail of Mina Ishido. Green hair. Sword strapped to his back for ease of motion, and footsteps at an easy and consistent pace. If he focused on the teen's emotionless expression and reserved body language, it almost looked like he was going for a morning jog, if not for the sheer speed and power used in each step. Despite the slender stature of its taker, he covered ground with sharp movements, kicking off and sending himself forwards with an aggressive and almost unbelievable pace. By the time the first of the teens passed the 5 kilometers mark, Ida having lapped the slowest of the teens almost twice, and as the rest of them lagged behind with exhaustion, Izuku had caught up and passed Bakugo and was passing Todoroki, much to the dismay of both. Marking down the time, Aizawa began to calculate the places and averages for everyone, and blinked as the fourth name belonged to Midoriya Izuku. Not bad, kid. Simulation, day 12 hours 16 hours and 1 second death count. 59. Blood splattered the ground, the pain pushed aside and ignored as Izuku rolled to his feet, eyeing the last of the pages. The 99th page, splattered with blood from a gash across Izuku's shoulder, faded away. The static was ever present, constant, and angry. There you are. The white form of Slender, already twitching and shifting, stood tall in between him and the last page. They were both in the dead center of the train yard, blocked in on two sides by towering walls of shipping containers, and the concrete wall of the storage yard on the far side. In the center of the area, the page hung pinned to a forklift side. Reaching up, Izuku kept eye contact with Slender, even as he grabbed the torn sides of his black shirt and ripped it open, his jacket having been sacrificed minutes ago to give him an escape. His torso was lacerated, long red lines across his chest, back, and arms. Close calls and last-minute dodges of the last half hour leaving clear marks. Holding the bundled shirt in his hands, he ripped a sleeve off and folded it up, placing it in his mouth and holding the rest in his grasp. He shifted his feet back and set his stance, crouching low like a sprinter. Slender opened his arms, as if inviting him to try, the skin shifting with ridged membranes that writhed and squirmed under the pale white masquerade of flesh. The static reached a feverish pitch. And Izuku moved. 10 meters between him and victory. Each step echoed off the metal walls, each breath, muffled as it was by cloth, was sharp, and as Slender flickered, moving to intercept, Izuku pivoted and leapt at the wall. Slender reappeared mid-swing, arm cutting past him, as he gritted his teeth and twisted, throwing his arm out to meet the attack. A splatter of blood. A supernova of pain that made him almost black out, biting into and almost through his cloth gi. A rising laughter in the static. And then Izuku was there. He didn't even wait to fumble and grab at the paper. Instead he threw his fist forwards, punching through the entire glass and the page itself with his left arm, while his right shoulder pumped red blood to the ground around him, ragged muscle and a splintered section of bone gleaming in the moonlight. Behind him, Slender went from amused to furious. And then the static stopped. Izuku glanced back to see the white humanoid form shift and twitch, limbs bending and twitching as it staggered, then collapsed. His right arm still held triumphantly in its grasp. Coughing, he spit the GG out, even as he turned to lean against the forklift with heavy breathing. Lifting the bundled shirt that had protected him from the window, he shook it, shards of glass dancing to the ground as he unwound it and pressed it to his stump. Simulation 1. Complete. Final time, 12:16:05:00 inch. Staggering over, Izuku glanced around as the simulation began to dissolve around him. He glanced down at the still convulsing pile of white flesh and sighed. Go F yourself. He turned away and looked. To see the simulation fade. And just before he felt the familiar rush of an ending simulation, but without the same blinding pain and muffled thoughts, a notification appeared. Slender complete. Notebook function unlocked. And then he blinked, finding himself once more uninjured, laying on the simulation podium in the room. For a moment, he just lay there, staring up at the ceiling as the glass visor receded into the podium. I did it. And then he began to laugh. I beat Slender. Izuku stretched as he slid his gear into the locker, pulling his school uniform back out and sliding it on as the faint murmur of the rest of the locker room echoed. Man, I can't believe that whole expulsion thing was a ruse. I thought for sure you were out of there, my Netta. That was the electric-haired blonde, who apparently hadn't paid enough attention to recognize Izuku's name yet. I know. God, that was terrifying. The shorter teen with the strange hair was shivering. Izuku almost wanted to scoff, but held it in. Terrifying? That test was easy. He reached in and grabbed his sheathed sword from next to him, hooking the buckle on his belt with a smooth click. Sighing at the weight of his hair, still damp from a shower, he pulled it all back into a small knot at the base of his skull, leaving a few curly ragged bangs unbound. Swinging the locker closed with a smooth click, he pulled the bow tie around his neck and began to tie it. He was about to leave when he caught the eye of the dichromatic teen who had ranked just above him in the exercise. Izuku narrowed his eyes at the impassive glare of the other teen, before with a sharp tug he finished the bow tie. Walking past him towards the exit of the showers, he paused, hands in his pocket and shoulder to shoulder with Todoroki. Problem? The question was soft and sharp. No. The reply was coolly reserved, and Todoroki proceeded to glance away. With that, Izuku kept walking, and as he pushed out into the hall beyond the changing rooms, he reached up and popped his neck. I wonder what your problem is, Todoroki, and why you decided to lie to my face about it. A tap of his fingers on the leather-wrapped hilt, and Izuku shook his head. He could hear the last of the boys finishing up and they would be right behind him. With smooth steps, he headed back to the classroom, eyes half-lidded in thought. Perhaps there were threats here as well. Just far more subtle. Ochako was excited, glancing around the class as the second day of the term rolled on. Already, several people had started to wander and gather in groups as the class relaxed in between PRDs. She glanced around and saw Izuku had taken what she now recognized as a comforting perch on the back windowsill of the room. His arms crossed and gaze locked out the window with earbuds in. Recognizing that he didn't want to be social, she wandered closer to the group of girls nearby, just in time to catch an argument between Jiro and Ishido. And I'm telling you, Deep Dope outsold and outperformed the Keiken last year. They are, empirically, the better band. No, they just have the bigger marketing team. Besides, they've been around longer, that doesn't mean they are better. Sidling up to the other girls watching, Ochako nudged the shorter girl with green hair. They been talking about this long? Just a few minutes. The raspy voice came out soft, before she blinked and held out her hand. Oh, I'm Azui, you can call me Tsu. Oh, then call me Ochako. The two glanced back as Jiro and Ishido got more and more excited and loud in their argument, both grinning at the emotional pink girl and the sarcastic punk rocker hashing it out. Tsuyu glanced past Ochako and blinked. Behind her at the windowsill, she caught the eyes of the strange boy who had been catching her instincts all day. The green-haired teen with the sharp eyes met her gaze evenly, hands crossed where he rested half-bathed in the early morning sunshine of the window. She felt herself tense up, feeling like she was facing a predator, much like she felt when her middle school friend, Habuko, would use her quirk when stalking her. For a moment, she flashed back to the first time the mongoose mutation girl had stalked her, and that almost instinctive surge of terror and fear. For a second, Midoriya looked scarier than Habuko ever had. Then, with a blink he shifted and looked away out the window, dismissing her from his focus. His eyes stared out at the sunlit grounds of UA, focus lost to the distance. The shift was disconcerting, but she quickly realized that the mood of the teen had changed with his focus. Like this, looking at it from the side, without the piercing gaze and lit by warm sunlight, he looked softer. The edge of intent she had felt against her skin was still there, but seemed sheathed like the blade at his side. Something wistful about his expression as he let the sun cast his features in contrast. She was broken from her quiet inspection as the door opened, bright blonde hair and leather outfit making its way through as Present Mike came in to start their English class. Inko sat in the office of the local police department, hands tensed in her sweater hem as she fought back the tears that kept leaking from her eyes. The detective and a hero, she didn't recognize him, but the suit was accented with a somewhat digital design, walked in. The detective, a plain-looking man in a tan suit and deep bags under his eyes, she thought his name was Naosara? Naomada? Something like that, she hadn't quite caught it. Miss Midoriya, this is my associate, the digital hero Codex. We think we found your son. Inko froze, eyes welling up with tears as she focused intently on the hero. Please. Where's my son? Where is my baby boy? I'm coming through the door like a normal person. Izuku's eyes tracked the motion of All Might, tracing his path and stature as he came to a halt in front of the whiteboard, dozens of subtle observations surfacing and glimmering in Izuku's thoughts as he took in the man's posture, speed, stance, and focus. He idly noted the more retro Silver Age outfit, just as a blonde teen, Kaminari, Electric Quirk, knows my story, shouted about it. Pushing the thoughts away for now, Izuku shifted so he was slightly more ready to move. After Aizawa's surprises and mind games the day before, he was currently considering any class as a possible reaction test until further notice. Welcome to the most important class at UA High. All Might stowed across the floor, arms wide in obviously well-practiced showmanship. This is, at its core, Hero NG 101. Students nodded and tensed in excitement as he spoke. Here you will learn the basics of being a pro, and what it means to fight in the name of good. An echoing clap of his hands and a slightly crouched posture that spoke of power was literally dragging Izuku's attention his way. Powerful. Dangerous. Committed. We dash. He slowed his heartbeat and gave a slow, languid blink as he repressed the instincts bubbling up from the darker half of his soul and mind. All Might seemed not to notice as he turned back, arms swinging down before with a move of his hand. Let's get into it, shall we? We'll kick things off. He opened his large fist to reveal a gleaming white note card reading battle, with some combat testing. Shouts of enthusiasm and surprise echoed the words, but Izuku was easily able to drown them out. For a moment, the class was gone, the students nothing but illusionary framework. Where All Might stood tall was a gleam of sun-off steel instead, with red feathers and a white tabard. Shall we engage in jolly cooperation? A blink, and the world snapped into place, Izuku carefully not even giving away that he had hallucinated such a vivid moment, a memory that he could place in a dozen times of his final trial. Instead he listened as All Might continued on. Keys of being a hero is... All Might pointed to the walls, where the compartments Izuku saw early this morning flipped open, revealing suitcases with numbers according to the class seats. Looking good. The costume boxes slid out of the wall, tilting to provide easy access. These were designed for you based on your Quirk registration forms and the request you sent in before school started. Go forth, and arm and dress yourselves to be the heroes you wish to be. Izuku waited a split second, letting the class begin to rush and fumble for their cases before with several quick and smooth motions he stepped up and slid his out and past the short and scurrying form of the purple-bald teen whose name he hadn't caught yet. Get yourself suited up, and then meet me at Training Ground Beta. Hearing the instruction and breathing deep to steady himself, Izuku slid back through the crowd, already following the loud and attention-grabbing form of the teacher as he directed them to the changing rooms from the day before. Focusing to steady himself. To blink away the faint sight of bloodstains that lined the hall, which stood out against the plain white of Yua. Izuku moved ahead of the pack. He needed to check his gear personally before he used it. He needed to center himself. Inko choked back sobs as she stared at the sealed-off area around the facility. She wasn't allowed in, but there were pictures, and a screen connected to the live stream. Part of her was still processing the absurdity of her new reality, trying so hard to understand just how much her son was facing. 14 hours ago, we tracked down your son's kidnapper. But there's a complication. She stared at the screen, watching in fearful awe at the feral-looking visage of her son as he ran through a forest, blood dripping from gashes across his cheek and a stream of curses that made her reflexively want to tell him to stop. But she couldn't. We tracked down Akihiko Sugo, who used to work as a contractor for the I-Island Digital Immersion Lab. He had been a valuable researcher, but it seems after being fired for unethical practices, he decided to prove his worth on his own. He's currently in detainment, but we can't undo what he started. Her son was in a computer, and it was being live-streamed to the world. Every day more and more people signed into the Forsaken website, curiosity and morbid fascination letting hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of sick people stare in curiosity at her son as he fought tooth and nail for freedom. They couldn't stop it. Any attempts set off warnings and risked threatening her son's very existence. And due to the quirk of the researcher being a vital process, they couldn't eject him from the computer. Her son was trapped, and all she could do is wait and hope. Please, Izuku, my baby, please come back to me. Todoroki shifted and twisted in his modified outfit, mainly checking that the artificial ice-like coating across his left side was firmly in place, and that his regulator was active and working. While it would take longer than using his quirk, it would be far more palatable than his SPRM donor's powers. Shoving the thought away, he checked to make sure the durable white and tan materials of his outfit fit and moved easily. As he glanced back, however, he saw it. One of the last members of the class to exit the tunnel, despite being one of the first into the changing room. Dark greens and steel grays and blacks blended against the tunnel's faint lightings, only coming into details once he crossed the threshold. A loose cloak that hung from his shoulders to just under his knees, black on the outside and deep green lining it, with a strip of silvery fur that lined the collar. Under it his neck was covered by a strange mechanical neck brace that looked almost like a steel collar of layered parts that formed and slid up under his jaw. Under the collar, a tight black shirt lined with ribbing of metal braces around his sides ran down his torso, a series of segmented black plates covering his stomach like a girdle up from his belt to cover almost to his sternum. A half-skirt of long silken material that gleamed metallic in the sunlight hung from under the ever-present sword belt to cover his left leg, falling over a simple pair of black combat pants and tucked into vibrant blood-red boots that rose halfway to his knees. Across his left arm, a thick curved bracer extended from his wrist to elbow, and rounded discs covered the rest of his arm to the shoulder from its aegis. The right arm was left loose and free, the sleeve cut short around his bicep. That was likely for offensive mobility, and the teen was currently adjusting the fit of the black fingerless gloves he wore to finish out the outfit. An asymmetrical design with defense and mobility in mind. I bet if something hit him from his left, it would be deflected or caught with ease. Does he use a defense posture with his weapon arm behind him? Todoroki took a second to clock the sword hilt barely visible under the left arm's shadow, and then blinked at the sight of a gunstock for some sort of rifle over his back, the rest of the weapon hidden under the loose collar of his cloak as it hung behind him. Quirk improves efficacy of weapons perhaps? Reflex and coordination, maybe. Todoroki glanced away as the teen strode into the crowd. You remind me of someone, but why? Inko sat across from Mitsuki, her friend's comments and assistance, sounding like so much noise as she sat and stared at the lukewarm coffee in her hands, the third day since she had found her son's fate. Her phone ringed. Blinking, she swallowed her dry throat and dragged her phone up from the table, Mitsuki cutting herself off in a mid-story rant even as Inko answered. Hello? Miss Midoriya? We have a new development. Izuku cleared the first game. Inko froze, and her phone slipped as a convoluted rush of emotion tore through her. Her son did it. He's advancing, fighting. He was coming home as fast as he could, and she felt a rush of shame, of fury and self-centered anger and focus. Her son, her precious hero-focused son, was crawling his way out of hell for her. And here she was? She had frozen, panicked, lost herself in nightmares and worry. And her son was coming. Her son was fighting monsters. Like that Slender beast. She had watched, seen the injuries that had barely slowed her son's motions, that had sent him cursing and pushing every harder. Shame gave way to steely determination. Like rusty steel rising from the water, bracing against the flooding emotions. Blinking, she picked her phone up. Tell me everything. Kodakuji was a nervous young man. Conflict was not his goal. Rescue and support of the people was. He had limited fighting experience despite his stature and secondary mutations increasing his strength and hardening his skin to a thick, leather-like appearance. His quirk was also far more suited to recon and rescue operations. Heck, his entrance to this school was only possibly because his nature led him to help assist and distract robots for other students in the vague hope it would count somehow. The only robots he personally destroyed were all Rogue One-pointers who had already been injured in previous clashes. And now he was going into a far more direct and brutal fight. He shook with fear as he watched the ball with his name roll out of the spinner, and then the name Izuku Midoriya came soon after. He was terrified. Every animal he had spoken to about the teen described the strange fact that he seemed to flicker and vanish from their senses with astounding ease. Something about him seemed to naturally refute the observations of the animals. Some innate sense or instinct triggered by them had sent several birds flying the moment he turned his gaze on them. And yet, as the two of them were naturally shuffled side by side, Koda felt far less intimidated. Hello. Seems we're teammates. I guess. A moment of silence, an assessing gaze and a nervous shuffle, before the other teen's hands came up and slowly and carefully signed. The motions were hesitant but very clearly defined and signed, the mark of an inexperienced but knowledgeable signer. Would you prefer sign? The interrogative tilt to Izuku's head looked awkward, as if he was trying to express emotion, but didn't feel natural. For a split second, the world seemed to click and make sense. He can't emote easily. Koda gave a smile, big and happy, and focused to let himself relax. His signing was slow and purposeful as he responded. Please and thank you. I am Koda Kuji. A pleasure to meet you. He wanted to help people, why not start here and now? The small, awkward smile on the other teen's lips was more than enough to convince him it was the right thing to do. Simulation, day 12 hours 17 hours 4 minutes and 20 seconds death count, 59. Izuku pushed himself out of the shower, shaking off heat and moisture as he strode out and grabbed the new clothes he had set on the disheveled bed in his room. The feeling of water and heat had been one of the best ways he had found to cope with the aches of missing wounds. Even now his fingertips of the arm he had sacrificed felt slightly numb, but the feeling was fading with each second. Stretching, he pulled on another running outfit, feeling nervous and focusing on calming himself. A new trial awaited him. Stepping out, he walked to the podium, noting the far wall. Above the desk where he had talked with his tormentor the very first time, was now a large screen. Most of it was taken up by a large timer, slowly clicking up second by second, but at the very top of the screen, in a simple box, read, Simulation 1 cleared, 12:16:05:00, in bright green text. For a moment he stared at it and breathed deep. A sense of fire, of emotion and satisfaction and drive, bloomed in his chest. Breaking his focus, he shifted and pulled himself up on the podium, laying down in a single far too practiced motion. As the visor slid up and over his head once more, he stared up. A flicker, almost like old film reel, and the next title appeared, a stylized carnival or party-looking font surrounding a pizza box. On the box was the name Freddy's. Breathing deep, he triggered the simulation, preparing for anything. The rush of falling, the flicker of reality. And he was sitting up in an office chair. He was so surprised by this he almost knocked his chair over, but as he focused he took in the brick and mortar room he was sitting in, a desk sitting before him. The only light besides the computer monitor came from a recessed light that flickered faintly above him. He took in happy-looking, yet decrepit, posters and art hanging from the walls, all promoting a pizza place known as Freddy Fazbear's. He would have kept checking out the room, but his thoughts were quickly interrupted by the ringing of a phone. Glancing around the desk, he was confused at the lack of a phone, before turning to see one hanging on the wall, facing away from the security desk. A blinking red light flashed as it rung again, and slowly Izuku stood and stepped towards it. Izuku breathed deep and focused. It rang a third time, and breathing deeply, Izuku lifted the receiver up and set it aside, tapping the speaker button and turning back to start checking over the desk and room, eyeing the two dark hallways to either side with trepidation and concern, before sorting through the desk. A voice rang out across the room from the phone, calm and somewhat reedy. Hello? I wanted to record a message for you to help you get settled in on your first night. Izuku glanced up, eyes locked on the monitor as cameras and a simple map of the building came up. I actually worked in that office before you. I'm finishing up my last week now, as a matter of fact. So, I know it can be a bit overwhelming, but I'm here to tell you there's nothing to worry about. You'll do fine. So, let's just focus on getting you through your first week. Izuku glanced back at the phone, blinking. Oh, that's not effing ominous. Simulation, day 12 hour 18 hours and 2 minutes death count, 59. Izuku glanced back to the phone, eyes narrowed as he focused back on the voice. Finishing up my last week now, as a matter of fact. So, I know it can be a bit overwhelming, but I'm here to tell you there's nothing to worry about. You'll do fine. So, let's just focus on getting you through your first week. Okay? Ominous tone there, guy. Izuku muttered as he flipped through piles of coupons and ads for Freddy Fazbear's, eyes roving for anything that stood out, while keeping his focus trained on the phone behind him. Let's see. First there's an introductory greeting from the company that I'm supposed to read. It's kind of a legal thing, you know. Welcome to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. A magical place for kids and grown-ups alike, where fantasy and fun come to life. Fazbear Entertainment is not responsible for damage to property or person. Upon discovering that damage or death has occurred, a missing person report will be filed within 90 days, or as soon property and premises have been thoroughly cleaned and bleached and the carpets have been replaced. Izuku dropped the papers in his hand as he slowly stood and turned to the phone, hands suddenly feeling clammy as the unsettling sense that this was going to be as bad as, if not worse than, Slender rushed through him, blood feeling like ice in his veins. Blah blah blah, now that might sound bad, I know, but there's really nothing to worry about. The animatronic characters here do get a bit quirky at night, but do I blame them? If I were forced to sing those same stupid songs for 20 years and I never got a bath, I'd probably be a bit irritable at night too. So, remember, these characters hold a special place in the hearts of children and we need to show them a little respect, right? Okay. Animatronics. Izuku glanced up to see the poster, the 4 robotic mascots presented with names in bright colors. Freddy Fazbear, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. He blinked and tapped the keyboard, seeing a simplified map appear and options for video cameras open up. He tapped the controls and began to cycle through options, trying to figure out how the system worked when he scrolled past a camera. A second of testing and he changed back to the view. A stage viewed from the side, with 3 of the 4 animatronics, staring out at a bunch of tables and booths. The characters do tend to wander a bit. They're left in some kind of free roaming mode at night. Something about their servos locking up if they get turned off for too long. They used to be allowed to walk around during the day too. But then there was the bite of it's amazing that the human body can live without the frontal lobe, you know? Oh, buddy, you have got to be effing me. Izuku muttered and glanced accusingly at the phone before looking back at the controls, tapping through feeds to try and find the fox as he listened carefully. Concerning your safety, the only real risk to you as a night watchman here, if any, is the fact that these characters, if they happen to see you after hours, probably won't recognize you as a person. They'll most likely see you as a metal endoskeleton without its costume on. That's starting to sound bad, phone buddy, really FNG bad. That's against the rules here at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. They'll probably try to forcefully stuff you inside a Freddy Fazbear suit. Izuku froze, hands still as he breathed deep and slowly turned to look at the phone, even as the recording continued. Now, that wouldn't be so bad if the suits themselves weren't filled with crossbeams, wires, and animatronic devices, especially around the facial area. So, you could imagine how having your head forcefully pressed inside one of those could cause a bit of discomfort. And death. The only parts of you that would likely see the light of day again would be your eyeballs and teeth when they pop out the front of the mask. Heh. That is not a laughing matter, buddy. Izuku blinked, standing and looking out the right door, seeing a dimly lit back hallway, and then turning and heading to the left as the recording played on and on. Why yeah, they don't tell you these things when you sign up. But hey, first day should be a breeze. I'll chat with you tomorrow. Check those cameras, and remember to close the doors only if absolutely necessary. Gotta conserve power. Alright, good night. Izuku froze, glancing out the left door, knuckles going white as they clenched on the frame of the door he was using to peek around. He turned and stared at the phone with wide eyes as a dial tone played, the recording over. What the F? Do you mean conserve power? Izuku lunged for the computer, tapping a key to wake up the screen as he looked and then saw it, at the bottom corner of the screen. 12:07 a.m. Power at 96%. He stared at that, before the sound of static made his eye twitch and him spin around, ready to dodge an attack, already looking out for the white flesh of Slender. A split second of panic, adrenaline pumping, wore off, and with a flare of realization. The sound hadn't come from behind. Izuku turned back to the screen. The camera feed now showed 3 animatronics staring straight at the security camera. Ida looked around, stretching slightly as he eyed his partner, one Fumikage Tokoyami. The shorter teen with bird-like features was covered by a black cloak, and seemed to be meditating and centering himself as the drawing for teams continued. Ida was already staring at the board as the names were filled in. The first match was Group C as villains, and B as heroes. Ida glanced around only to blink in surprise as 2 teens seemed to stare each other down. If he was correct, the blonde with an explosive quirk, Bakugu, was teamed with the girl with acid, Ashido. Meanwhile, the young man with the dual-colored hair and fairly prominent scar, Todoroki, was standing face to face with him, arms crossed, while a seemingly disembodied pair of gloves and boots stood behind him, nervously fretting. That would be the invisible student, a Miss Hagakure? From his position, he couldn't make out more than the faintest growling and tone of voice from them. Putting it out of his mind, he focused back on the list and blinked as teams F and D were called to perform in the second round. Team D was him and his cloaked companion, who would be playing the role of heroes. For a moment Ida scanned through the group, trying to remember who was them. The two quietest teens of the class were standing to the side, hands moving and flickering in calm and careful gestures. The larger teen, Kota Kuji, if Ida had heard right, had a gentle smile and a small bird perched on his shoulder. His companion, the stoic Midoriya Izuku, was next to him. Interestingly enough, he seemed to be the second most armored student, with almost full coverage by his armor and his sword at his side, along with the stock of some sort of rifle or weapon across his back, hidden by the cloak. The sight made Ida tense, the flicker of memory of the teen hanging from the face of the massive zero-pointer in mind. If that was the same weapon, he would very much like to never face it head-on. Sadly, it didn't seem like he would get a choice. He glanced up and blinked, realizing he had missed the last 4 match drawings. The rest of the class was pairing off, and with a shout, All Might directed them towards the nearby viewing room. Bakugo met the dead-eyed gaze of his opponent as they stood. The two-tone BSD didn't even respond to his opening trash talk, and the lack of insight was pissing him off. His armor looked like ice, so there was a thematic base to judge his power off of. That, and he had seen the ice structures that the teen had summoned the day before, but why only half of his body? The question was nagging at the back of his skull, even as he turned away from the silent teen. You better prepare, BSD, we'll be waiting for you to come with all you have, and we'll crush you when you get there. Yeah. The pink chick who was his teammate grinned and flashed a victory sign back at the other team as they marched off, heading towards the building they were supposed to hold. As he passed through the first door, he frowned and swept over the surrounding hallways, before he slowly started grinning. Hey, Pinky, you make acid, right? It's Mina, and yeah, I do blasty. What are you thinking? I think we start with some renovations to our base. He grinned, teeth bared in ferocious intent. Here's what we're gonna do. The other 16 students had gathered in the observation booth, a wall of monitors lighting up as the cameras came online and began to flicker and search through the building and its surrounding sides. Izuku blinked and bit back the urge to rush and get up close. This wasn't the same room he was killed in so many times, despite the spectral bloodstains and that faint, just beyond earshot, sound of gears and clanking. He blinked and breathed deep and let it out slowly. His eyes opened to clean walls and bright corners. A bump on his shoulder and the soft and caring gaze of his teammate locked onto his eyes. You okay? Izuku brought his hands up, a reflex to brush off Kota's hand on his fingertips, but instead, will be. Bad memory. Kota nodded slowly, hand clapping Izuku on the shoulder in comfort for a moment. He let it drop just before the sound of All Might over the speakers echoed out. The villain's prep time is over. Heroes, you may begin. Izuku idly bit the inside of his lip, even as he got bumped, Kota wincing as he signed out a single word that made Izuku's lips twitch up. Loud. Turning back, he looked over the monitor, eyes roving across them with the ingrained memory of dozens of nights of long hours. Planning and countering. As he took in the villain's actions, he blinked slowly, before the smirk grew more pronounced. That's a smart play, Kaken. Can you back it up? So, what's our plan, Mr. Quiet Guy? Todoroki glanced to the side at the hands and feet floating nearby, the only clear indicators of his teammate. You step back and I finish this in the first blow. A shift of gloves and boots, probably trying to project some sort of emotion to her movement that he could barely understand. Something about impatience? Ignoring her antics, he breathed in, counting down the seconds until he could act. Really, that's your plan? You really think the dash? Heroes you dash. Todoroki didn't hesitate, he didn't think. He took only a few seconds to center himself, before gathering his quirk's icy power in his hand, pulling it in and condensing into as strong and as potent of an attack as he dared. This was the time to make an impression, to prove he stood above everyone without his father's quirk. When it reached the tipping point, when his fingers felt numb as the cold began to overwhelm his natural resistance, he simply stepped forwards and slammed his right foot down as he swept his arm forwards. He focused, and instead of forming a glacier, he sent his quirk out in a far more subtle form. He ran it through the entire building, across every wall and floor and ceiling. Where his quirk passed, the world became an icy hellscape. With a thunderous crack, the building was encased and laced with ice, frost dancing over any and every surface. For a moment, stunned silence rang out. Besides him, the invisible girl was shocked into silence, while Todoroki listened, planning to hear cries of frustration and anger from the building. He didn't expect to hear a deranged cackle of anger and pride. A blast of smoke, flame, and force rocked from the front door of the frozen-over building, and as the iced stone and metal shattered and spread across the no-man's land between the heroes and the building, the intimidating, explosion-themed hero in training glared out, head lowered as a disconcerting chuckle echoed through the ice-cold air. "Oh, you need to do better than that, you half-and-half BS-dirty. If you think that your little winter wonderland bullshit is gonna stop us, then you're more conceited than I thought." He cackled, and with a blast from his hand, smoke filled the doorway, concealing his retreat back into the depths of the wintry building. Todoroki was dumbfounded. How the hell did he avoid that blast, the one that opened the door? He was waiting. He must have been ready to meet them, probably wanting to take an early shot at the hero team. "Well, what now, Ice Boy? We gonna come up with a plan or sit here till the timer runs out?" Todoroki glanced at where the girl would be and scowled. "You go for the bomb, I'll distract them." She shifted, but Todoroki was charging the door, steam rolling off his form as he used his father's curse. To warm up enough to use his ice freely once more. "Reckless." Koda raised his eyebrows at the annoyed tick to the word, the aggressive tap of fingers clear as the screen showed Todoroki advancing into the building. "Cameras inside are down. Most just. Not all." Izuku gestured up at a series of cameras that had been unfrozen, two of which seemed to be statusy and lopsided. It took a second for Koda to realize they overlooked the ground floor of the building, which meant that Bakuga's explosion must have cleared their icy covers away. The cameras were trained on what once was the entrance hall of the building, before the villain team had decided to change a few things. What once was a fairly careful recreation of an office building's layout was now replaced by a wide, open ground floor, with missing walls, which had been melted or shoved away. The center of the floor had been turned into a grand open room, with only the main supporting pillars for the building left untouched. The outer rooms and walls were the same, in order to keep the heroes from noticing the surprise renovations. In the back of the room, an opening in the ceiling showed the twisted and melted remains of the stairwell up to the above floors, removed from play before the heroes even got there. And in the center, face pulled into a grin of excitement, stood Bakugo. Todoroki barely had a moment to take it in, before the fight began in earnest. Even in the observation room, the roar of combat was loud and clear, massive chains of explosions, and the sound of cracking ice echoes through the screens a half-second behind the sounds from outside. So they turned the first floor into an arena. That seems particularly foolish. Bakugo seems exposed and has nowhere to take cover. The speaker, a tall girl with a black ponytail and gray eyes, frowned at the scene she saw. "That Bakugo's a distraction." She turned to meet Izuku's gaze, only to see the shorter teen with his eyes closed and head tilted, as if listening to the rapid sounds of the fight. The girl waited, but when the teen didn't continue, she sighed and spoke up. "Would you care to explain?" A single green eye cracked open, appraising Momo Yaoyorozu with intent, before the soft voice spoke out, gathering the attention of most of the class. "Bakugo is a fighter to the core. His skill set is built and refined around destructive close-quarters combat with a focus on rapid and high-intensity engagement. It's his bread and butter, his perfect storm. I guarantee he could leap up that hole with minimal effort, something neither of his enemies nor his teammate could achieve quickly. He turned a maze of options for stealth and evasion into a single choke point, and has set himself up for exactly the kind of fight he prefers. If anything, Todoroki-san's efforts only assisted him. The ice outside the building means the only way up is through." Momo blinked and glanced back at the monitors. "And if they only have 15 minutes to get past Bakugo dash." This time Izuku looked up, eyes focused on one of the screens as an explosion blasted the dichromatic teen back. "They only have 11 now. And Todoroki is losing ground fast." The question is, what do the wild cards plan to do while the Titans fight it out? His eyes narrowed as he caught another glimpse of Todoroki, darting back from the fight with steam drifting off his form. The feed was distorted, smoke and flashes of explosions disrupting the video, but he could see it, just for a split second. Flames under his fake ice armor. Now, why would you refuse your power? A flash of Todoroki's expression at the end of the Quirk assessment, of his demeanor and a half-noticed glance. And with that, things began to click, giving him the shape of the problem. You are a fool, Todoroki. Pride has no place on the field. Toru crouched behind one of the support pillars, gloves long since left behind as she crouched and maneuvered up and closer to the second-floor entrance. Finally, a wave of ice covered her position from the fight. With grace and quiet motions, she leapt up and latched onto the lowest stair, pulling herself up with a soft grunt of effort, only to blink at the twisted and half-melted stairwell leading up. Sighing, she rolled up and began to ascend the stairwell to the second floor. Oh, I'll finish it with one move, she mocked, leaping over a half-twisted chunk of concrete, still faintly hissing from acid despite the icy covering. Not like the other team has a plan or course of action. She slipped and bit back a curse as she felt her hand grow warm with liquid. The translucent blood was one of the biggest issues with her power set. She could rarely judge just how much damage she's taken. And even her awareness of her body had its limits. And the goddamn numbing cold wasn't helping a hole. Finally reaching the second floor, she glanced in, only to blink as an explosion tore a section of the floor apart down the hall from her. Well, that's the wrong floor. Closing the door of the stairwell, she turned and continued parkouring up. Todoroki was panicking, he admits. His body was already starting to ache and seize up, muscles spasming from repeated applications of extreme cold then rapid warming. He gritted his teeth and leapt back, another explosion blowing his latest fortification away into the barest glimmers of diamond dust. Not so cocky now, huh? Half and half? The smoke and ash-covered form of Bakugo strode out of the mist, his mouth pulled tight into a massive grin that only promised pain to his opponent. Shudo glared back, already trying to raise his body temperature once more, steam wafting off his form. And like that, Bakugo's smile faded away, eyes narrowing in focus. You're holding back. Shudo's eyes widened, and that was all the confirmation Bakugo needed. A blast of light and force, and he was suddenly up close and personal. Shudo raised his left arm, and the rounded metal gauntlet slammed into his hasty guard like a freight train. Clear resin and insulation styled like ice was outright shattered, and the force of it sent Todoroki flying like a ragdoll. His body was still bleeding steam even as he slammed into one of the few remaining upright walls. He slammed through a layer of ice, through drywall and insulation which cratered around his body, before he smashed through the far side and into the dust and frost-covered outer room. You better step up your game. If you look down on me, then I'll just have to push you until you break. Bakugo smashed his braced fists together in a flash of sparks and energy, and marched forwards. From the hole, a spear of ice, deadly sharp, move out at Bakugo, only to be contemptuously shattered with a bash of his gauntlets. Shudo pushed up, his silhouette visible through the hole in the wall, and his voice, ice-cold with emotion and hate, echoed out. I refuse to use my father's quirk. And in the second after he declared it as such, the world around Bakugo was nothing but a rushing wall of ice. Groans echoed through the observation room as all the cameras watching the fight down below on the first floor suddenly flickered and died. But at the back of the room, Izuku was already watching the screen that showed the new fight, a camera placed above the hero's entrance to the area. 1 minute remains. Bakugo breathed out, a burst of explosion clearing the space around him as he stared up at the building before him, and at the uncontrolled glacier that had sprouted from the lowest 2 floors. He had been shoved back by the rush of ice, only quick thinking blasting him clear of the spikes and freezing energy. It had only required blowing himself out the window to get away. Grinning, he relaxed. Maybe Todoroki was still holding back, but now he had a perfect excuse to try out a new trick. He leaned forwards, bracing his stance around his right arm, holding up his gauntlet as he flipped the safety switch under its edge and aimed out. Almost an hour's worth of sweating and build-up since he first donned his armor at the start of class. Now let's see just how much firepower he can put out. He grinned maniacally and pulled the trigger. The glacier shattered before him, ice that had coated the outside of the building sublimating and every window facing him shattering under the pressure wave. Bakugo himself was blinking, having staggered back from the blast as he eyed his work. For the first 3 floors of the building, the outer wall had simply vanished, leaving ice and rubble strewn across the floor and around the building. He looked for any trace of half and half, and then scoffed as he realized the bottom floor was nothing but massive chunks of ice that blocked his entrance. Damn it. He looked up. Less than a minute, huh? He grinned and prepared to move. Ashido swung her legs back and forth aimlessly, sitting on a metal crate with the bomb resting atop it behind her. Her shoes had also been taken off and set next to her, and her feet were currently dripping acid at a slow pace, pooling in a low-potency puddle that was gradually expanding across the cool concrete floor. Large chunks of it were still frozen and floating around her box, but as she relaxed she could hear the combination of explosions and insults from her partner while she was tasked with guarding the box. 1 minute remains, she winced at the volume of the announcement, but grinned. And then she saw it. A shifting ripple in the acid, not much, but just enough to draw her attention. And then, before she could act, there was a massive flash of bright light, and a shockwave of sound smashed her off her perch, her flailing limbs splashing up acid around her, even as the shocked form of Toru came into visibility, form outlined by the pale pink acid, literally 2 feet from her. For a moment, both stared at each other as the sounds of fighting resumed downstairs. And then Toru lunged. Todoroki gave a shuddering breath, drawing desperately on the fire of his father to stave off the bone-deep chill as he gazed at the shattered floor around him, his glacier reduced to massive chunks of ice that filled the space around him, any cohesion broken under the shockwave. He stood from his prone position on shaky legs, steam slowly billowing from the ice-covered flesh of his body. Ashido yelped and twisted, barely dodging an elbow as it swung for her head. What dash? And then Toru swept her legs and she landed in her own acid puddle. As Toru shifted to try and get to the bomb, Mina was already spinning, kicking her legs out to catch Toru's, the invisible girl shrieking in surprise as she stumbled to her knees. Over the intercom, All Might's voice rang out once more. 10. Shudo shoved ice away and his eyes went wide as a massive chunk of ice across from him shattered, revealing Bakugo. 9. Toru growled and twisted, rolling free of Mina as she tried to grapple the invisible teen. 8. Bakugo grinned and darted forwards. Ice Boy looked exhausted, skin pale and balance shot. Quirk exhaustion, clearly. His hand dropped down to grab what he needed, even as Half and Half tried to stagger into a combat stance. 7. Mina pushed off and slammed into the crate, cursing as the invisible teen danced by her attack. 6. Shudo threw his arm forwards, a wave of irregular ice trying to catch Bakugo only for a blast to tear it apart. 5. Toru smashed her fist into Mina's side, making the pink-skinned girl gasp at the hit before grabbing her shirt collar and twisting, throwing the acid-spewing teen across the floor. 4. Bakugo slid low and twisted, the red and white teen trying to turn and track him but stumbling. Darting in, Bakugo's hand smacked into Todoroki's chest, and a white line of the capture tape was stuck to the teen's shirt. 3. Mina rolled up, eyes wide as she saw Toru charging the crate with the bomb. 2. Shudo blinked as his arm was yanked back, eyes losing focus from shock and pain as he felt a line of tension across his chest. 1. Toru slapped her hands on the bomb and prayed, even as far below her, her partner collapsed, arms bound tightly by the capture tape and body shaking from the strain of overusing his quirk. The victor is the villain team. Toru slammed her head against the crate. God f damn it. Izuku smirked, eyeing the cameras as the teams slowly were attended to and gathered by small robots and the 2 pairs of partners gathered together. Good game, but I suppose now I should show off to follow up that display. His hands came up, and he tapped Kuta's side before he began to sign. I have a plan. Night 1 2 and 2 seconds AM, 68% power. Izuku blinked, rubbing away the strain of his eyes as he tabbed through the screens quickly. So far he had been careful to conserve power, going so far as to manually check both halls and spend plenty of time simply listening for any auditory cues. However, he was slowly growing nervous. The sounds and echoes of the animatronics moving was constantly putting him on edge, and the faint glimpses of them on the screen only made it worse. He glanced at the clock once more, before putting the screen to sleep again. Time, 2:05 a.m. Power, 67%. Ida and Tokoyami glanced down the street. The still smoking and ice-covered remains of the original test building were clearly visible, while before them was another basic building. As the two heroes in training stretched and readied, they began to talk. I possess engine-augmented legs, allowing me to accelerate quite fast. Yourself? I carry my darker half, his ethereal form quite dangerous. Darkness increases the depth of my power. From under the hem of Tokoyami's cloak, a shadowy black bird peeked out, its shining yellow eyes peering up at Ida. The taller teen took a second to process before nodding awkwardly. Well, shall we plan on how to engage our enemies? If you possess speed, then perhaps you should lead, while I provide rear cover as we clear. I suppose that is the best way to proceed. The two fell back into an awkward silence as they waited for the 5 minutes to end. Izuku glanced around the room, the bomb having been moved by the efforts of the two teens. Turning, he signed to his comrade. You okay guarding? Yes. Be safe. Of course. Izuku looked back once as he left the room, Koda already leaning out of the window as a small flock of birds began to gather on the far side of the building from the hero team's entrance. Stepping through the door, he thought back to the note that he had received from Hatsume. I got the guns and the main armor finished up, but the new sword, your special weapon, and your cutter are giving me trouble. Mask is done though, left hand pocket under the armor cloth. Good luck, test them well. Mouth twitching slightly in amusement at the memory, he slid his hand under the half-skirt at his side, pulling forth a thick, curved mouthguard-looking hunk of metal. He brought it up, and with a small whirring click, it attached to the metal gorget that covered his neck. As it covered his jaw, he breathed deep and pressed 2 buttons to activate it. Whirs and clicks echoed as plates shifted and realigned, coming out to wrap around his jaw and face, thin flexible plates reaching up, till they aligned over his cheekbones and nose, forming a smooth, curved grill with a design almost like bared teeth, his breath coming out as a faint hiss when he exhaled. As the guard finished, he closed his eyes, feeling 2 squared pieces shifting to cover his sockets as a third, wider plate wrapped from temple to temple over it. A second, and then a faint beep, and the darkness that covered his eyes was replaced by a faint blue light. He opened his eyes to see the world around him washed in a blue hue, the darkest corners of the building now lit clearly to his eyes. Tapping the side of the visor, the blue faded away as he turned off the UV of the helmet, leaving him with the world looking slightly washed out instead. He tapped the earpiece he wore, and checked it, hearing the channel open in his ears. Hunter. Com check. His voice, normally fairly monotone, sounded mechanical and threatening to his own ears. The muffling of his face masked more than enough to remove the last traces of intonation. That could be annoying in the field. He'd have to check with Hatsume about it later. Watcher, com check. Koda's fairly high-pitched voice echoed across the communicators clearly. Good. Let me know when you're ready. Yes. Izuku nodded, and shifted his shotgun from his back to his hands, reflexively checking the chamber to see the vibrant purple case of the paint shells he was handed out. Checking with Hatsume via text, she had confirmed they were solid shells that would splatter on impact, and not when leaving the barrel. So he had quite a bit of range for a shotgun. Clicking the slide back, the chamber closed and Izuku slung it back across his shoulders. If he was correct, he had just under 2 minutes left until the conflict truly began. Reaching in his pocket, he unhooked and pulled out a braided paracord bundle, black thin cord strong enough to support his weight if necessary. Nodding, he also reached in and pulled a small box of loop-headed pitons from another pocket. 200 feet of paracord and 5 floors to cover. Better get going. Stepping forward, he got to work. Time, 4:42 a.m. Power, 19%. Izuku growled as he heard the repeated clanging of metal on metal from behind the dropped door. "Go away, you stupid F-bird." He looked back out the other door, fingers rapping on the door frame as he glanced around, tensed and ready for another assault. With a final echoing clank of metal on metal, the hammering stopped. Turning back, Izuku frowned and breathed deep and slow, trying to calm himself. Running. He could see it, a split second of red fur and metal, far more rugged than the others, as that F-fox ran at him. Down the hallway. Ducking back inside the room, Izuku slapped the button to drop the door, grimacing as he considered the cost of the power he was about to use, just in time for the slam of metal on metal as the fox shoulder checked the door. He darted to the other door, and slammed the light for just a second, the form of Chica, the goddamn chicken robot, outlined in the light before he turned it off. F-. He rested his head against the metal of the door, trying to let the cool steel help with the burning that he could feel in his eyes. Almost 5 hours down. Just one more. Bakugo glared at the camera screens showing the feed from the building, feeling the strange itch and flex of his muscles as he clenched and unclenched his fists. Deku was more than smart, he was dangerous. Bakugo knew it. And it was on display here. The green-haired teen was cutting between feeds fast and loose, darting from location to location with sure and swift movement, leaving behind coils and half-hidden loops and lines of paracord, before he turned and bolted up the stairs to the top floor as Bakugo's mental timer hit 10 seconds. At 0, the armored teen was opening a window on the top floor, the shotgun no longer across his back, but braced by his shoulder as he took aim. The villain's prep time is over. Heroes, you dash. All Might's announcement was cut off by 2 quick booms, gunfire muted by the walls but still clearly audible over the system. Following that was the deep mechanical growl of the teen over the comms. Point 2. Time, 5:37 a.m. Power, 5%. Izuku glanced up, eyes stinging as he put the computer to sleep once more. 23 minutes, and 5%. He looked around and stood, heading to the doors to manually check them once more. He was tired in a way that Slender had never pushed him to, his eyes burning from stress. His hearing was fading in and out as he tried to focus, straining to hear any footsteps or clunking gears approaching. He glanced out the right door, leaning heavily on the frame as he looked down the long hallway. Stepping back, he turned and heard it. A single click. Too close, too close. He lunged across the security room, smacking the button to shut the door even as the purple enameled frame of Freddy FNG Fazbear latched on the corner. The door slammed shut, but Izuku could feel it, the creeping sense of dread, 1,000 times worse than seeing something like his phone almost dead. As if to punctuate that dread, the thudding of metal knuckles on the door began. A morbid, slow heartbeat that was waiting for him. 5% left. A door uses 1% of power every 4 minutes. 2 doors is half the time for each percent, which means it uses 1% every 2 minutes. I lose 1 every 6 to 7 minutes to minor drain. If I was only dealing with the minor drain, it would give me 30 minutes. With the drain of 1 door, it'll be 12, and if they come for the other door, it'll be even faster. Sheet. Izuku mumbled and paced to the other door, checking if it was clear for just a second as he kept muttering. His mind was running the math, but it was all coming up short. It didn't matter what he did or how much he compared the numbers, it wasn't enough. I need 10 minutes that I don't have. It was only emphasized as Freddy slammed the door again. Ida flinched as the wall next to his head seemed to burst, bright purple goo splattering at his side, even as another slammed into the wall just next to Tokoyami, purple paint splattering across the dark feathers and the shoulder of his cloak. Down. Ida dove behind a dumpster nearby and Tokoyami darted across the ground to another piece of cover, a pile of crates that rested against the wall. It was only then, as Ida glanced back, that his adrenaline froze in his veins. Next to where he and Tokoyami stood, were 2 rounds perfectly spaced to emulate where their heads had been. Reaching up to the left of his helmet, he pulled the gloved fingers away to reveal they were dripping purple. That he could have killed us in the first second of the fight? Ida turned to see the open window, overlooking the courtyard. That was our folly. Were we really so ignorant as to not take cover from the windows? Tokoyami's voice came over the comms, whispering softly. Ida, you okay? Yes. I suppose we have to move in. Keep to cover. Of course. You as well. Izuku watched from the window next to the one he had shot from as the two heroes cautiously darted from cover to cover. He scowled at the thought that they considered that protection. If he was using an actual gun, only a few pieces of cover would keep them safe. He glared at the shotgun chamber for a second before stashing it across his back again. Note: new issue with paint rounds. No penetrative power. Pushing off from the window, he headed to the west side of the building while the heroes slowly advanced from the north and opened another window, the 15 meters of cord coiled next to it nailed securely to the wall by 3 black pitons. Swinging the window open silently with a slow, careful gesture, he tossed the rope out of it and turned back to the stairwell. He took the steps 2 at a time, footsteps quick and yet nearly silent as he moved down to the second floor. Standing there silently, he listened. He could hear the heavy footsteps of Ida as he walked to the door, and Tokoyami was audible by the sound of heavy cloth rasping over stone as he crouched next to the armored teen. Grinning, Izuku flicked the safety on the handgun off. Ida and Tokoyami breathed a sigh of relief as they reached the door. Raising his hand, Ida began to count down to breach. Glass shattered above him and Ida looked up, with eyes widening behind his helmet, as time seemed to slow. A mask reaching up to lanky green curls that looked at him. An empty blue glowing visor stretching across and concealing his eyes as the rest of his face was. Covered by a frankly terrifying metal mask, pieces flowing to form a snarling face of metal. The masked and seemingly merciless form of Midoriya. Izuku looked down, one hand holding the window frame as the other leveled the handgun at them. 2 shots rang out, more paint rounds, these red, smashing into the wall just next to their heads once more. In the moment of shock and silence, there was a chuckle that sounded all the more threatening just by the lack of emotion it contained. 4. With a shift of weight, Midoriya vanished back inside. Behind the still stunned Ida, Tokoyami spoke up, his form shifting as Dark Shadow expressed himself in full, the dark projection wreathing up and around the back of the raven-faced teen. That I do believe we are facing a far more terrifying villain than we expected. And with that, Ida was filled with a forceful drive to prove himself, to show his opponent that he was not to be toyed with. We cannot let him keep the momentum. Thrusters firing, Ida kicked the door in, opening up into the central hall of the floor, the stairway in plain sight. Ida took only 3 steps, Tokoyami darting in to cover them as they entered the building. They had barely taken in the area when Midoriya dropped into view from the stairwell. Hanging upside down, with his feet braced on the underside of the railing of floor above them. His left hand was clutching tightly to a loop of black cord tied above him as the right came up, or down as the case may be, training the gun on the 2 heroes. However, even as Ida was moving to dodge, Dark Shadow darted forth and curled around the heroes, solidifying to take the attacks with a screech of pride and anger. 2 red splatters of paint covered the black before dripping onto the floor. That finally you fight back. With that parting comment, Midoriya seemed to vanish from view once more, pulling himself back up the stairwell with a low chuckle that echoed, amplified by his mask, off the building around them. Good. I was worried this would be boring. And with that, the lights of the building went dark. Koda glanced up and took a deep breath before looking at the window and the various crates surrounding the room. Almost 100 birds sat perched on edges and windowsills. Sparrows, pigeons, swallows, crows, and even 2 kite hawks. With another deep breath, he called out, "Get going, please." With a flurry of wings, they leapt and took flight, swirling around Koda in a myriad of feathers, before funneling out the window, and then beginning to flutter and circle the building itself. Reaching up, he took a steadying breath and tapped his comms. "Midoriya, you've got your distraction." He glanced up as the lights cut out and nodded. It seems the rats had found the power box. Tokoyami backed up, his mental grip on Dark Shadow tight as he focused. The long hallways were dim, but not truly dark, mainly because of the light reflecting from the windows and the open doorway into the corridor. as well as a faint glow of sunlight shining down the center of the stairwell. Even with that much light, it was dark enough that Dark Shadow had doubled, almost tripled, in size. And with an increase in size, came an increase in his quirk's will. We can take them. No. We've underestimated him twice and lost in all but name each time. Now we be careful. Time. Act or lose. Growling, Tokoyami begrudgingly agreed. Ida, we're losing time. You head up and start searching for the bomb. I'll hunt down and keep the Dark Knight occupied. The white-armored teen paused, but nodded, rushing up the stairs and darting through the door into the second floor. Tokoyami had been paying attention, however, and stepped into the dark of the stairwell, glancing down at the faint shadow that was cast across the bottom of the landing, before moving his gaze far above to see the armored and masked form of Midoriya far above him, leaning over the stairwell of the third-floor landing. Come to keep me company, as your ally searches for the bomb? Came the call, metallic tone echoing even the handgun was aimed down. At the bottom of the stairwell, Dark Shadow stretched and twisted up. I shall be your shadowed hero, villain. Then I shall be your sunlit villain, hero. With that, Tokoyami lifted his arms and sent the mass of Dark Shadow twisting and clawing up the stairwell, gashes ripping through stone as the possession quirk attacked. Midoriya remained unimpressed. Tisk, no control. And through the shadowy mass, Tokoyami could only stare as deep blue burned to life in the visor of Izuku's mask. Where Izuku looked, Dark Shadow withered, flinching back before it could reach the villain. A ring of steel on leather, and a sword, crude but sharp, struck out, severing the arm of the shadow and making it lose its grip. In less than a second, the arm was already regrown, but by then the next action had already been played. Izuku's left hand came down, and with a flare of sparks and bright red light, he struck the tip of a magnesium flare to life. The glow made Dark Shadow retreat in fear, even as Midoriya lunged forwards, into the darkness of the sword and flare held out to meet the shadow. Time, 5:51 a.m. Power, 1%. Izuku breathed deep, hands slowly opening and closing as the light flickered above him. The doors were both open, Freddy having left to wander the building, as if it were a joke. As if he was gonna let him live. That was a fing lie. Izuku stretched slowly, arms and legs limber. If he was going to lose, then he was going to make them work for it. The lights went out, but Izuku was already moving, charging out into the black hallway, eyes already adjusting to the dark. Slender did teach him something after all. Tokoyami darted away, the shifting and flickering form of Dark Shadow flowing back and forth with increasingly weak and pained attempts at countering the force of the enemy. The flare was sending Dark Shadow flinching back with each sweep and burning move, while the sword was harrying the teen himself, long tears appearing in his cloak as the blunted tip caught and pulled across it. Tokoyami's repeated failure to be able to disengage was sending shockwaves of pain across his body from numerous jabs and taps across his arms and sides. In a real fight I would have died by no dash. His eyes widened with that realization, and then with a flicker of force and a low sweeping leg, Tokoyami was knocked off his feet, falling back to the ground. His eyes fluttered shut from pain and regret. 2 thuds of ringing metal echoed out, and suddenly Tokoyami's cloak was his prison. 2 large combat knives had been driven halfway through the floor into the concrete, one under each arm and at his sides, driven through his cloak and into the stone to pin him down. Turning and sheathing his sword, Midoriya strode away, his voice ringing out. A quirk is no excuse to leave a body weak. Train hard, Tokoyami. As Tokoyami dropped his head back, he stared up at the ceiling in the half-lit hallway. And then he began to chuckle to himself. Fool me. I do believe that we have just been owned. His laughter deepened, and he tugged at his arms, feeling the restriction of the cloak binding him tight. Speaking up so his earpiece could hear, All Might, I do believe that this is me out for the match. I'll wait here for the fight to end. Of course, young Tokoyami. It shall only be a few minutes longer. Tenya ducked and weaved around corners, darting across the 3rd floor. Last time he had passed through the stairwell, it was to the sounds of blades and shadows fighting. He glanced around the last room, and growled in frustration. Inside his helmet, the timer he had set was counting down. 6 minutes left. He turned back to the main corridor, making for the stairs, and paused. Standing against the railing, arms crossed and head tilted, was Midoriya. 1 down. You're all that's left. The bland metallic tone set Tenya's nerves on fire, and the click of the comms only made it worse. As Tokoyami admitted that he was out of the match, Tenya breathed deep and looked back at the villain. So, hero? What's your play? The flare of exhaust, the growl of the engine, and the humming power surging up his legs. Tenya lunged. And beneath his mask, Izuku's lips curled into a slight smile. Time, 5:54 a.m. Power, 0%. Izuku rolled over a table, even as Freddy's fist came crashing down over the wooden surface. As he lunged up and away, Bonnie came around the next table, servos and springs clicking as it tried to box him in. He kicked the chair next to him up and at the animatronic even as he jumped atop the next table. Foxy was wandering the edge of the dining room, waiting in the wings for an escape attempt. Freddy, Chica, and Bonnie were all trying to box Izuku in, spitting up to circle and close in on him. He leapt from one table to the next, avoiding Chica's reach as he moved closer and closer to the stage, the animatronics moving in after him. That's right, come and get me, you tin-hearted morons. He was forced back once more, and seeing no recourse, he jumped up onto the stage, turning in the dark to see the advancing animatronics. Just a little longer, come on, come on. As Ida darted forwards, he didn't see a rope that had been uncoiled and stretched across the hallway, didn't see that in the darkness, Izuku had prepared a rope, that his hand held capture tape in his grasp. But he felt it. His ankle caught the rope, tripping him up as he crossed the last threshold. He stumbled forwards, and Izuku stepped to the side, almost gently patting the teen on the back, before shoving him over the railing of the stairs. With a crash, Ida cleared the gap in the center of the stairwell. He landed on the far side of the railing, armor cracking as he slammed at high speeds into the wall under the window, glass shattering from the impact. Blinking in dazed confusion, Ida began to clumsily stagger up, hand on the wall for support. He looked up, eyes unfocused, only to be met by the sight of 2 birds, large hawks, who were staring at him with gimlet eyes. As his vision focused, Ida's gaze trailed up to see more than just 2 birds. There were dozens. All of them perched on railings and stairs leading up to the skylight far above. They twitched and shifted and hopped around, wings fluttering, but almost all of them were focused on him. Stepping out from the landing above, Midoriya and his blue-visored mask stared down at him with the flock of birds. Reckless. You let your temper get the best of you. Ida staggered as he reached up, pulling off his helmet and gasping for air. Ooh, foul villain. Above him, a low, echoing metallic sigh came out, before the mask began to fold away, dropping into a thick metallic jaw piece that Izuku pulled off. You've lost, hero. Tenya staggered and growled out. I can still fight. No. You've lost. Check your arm. Ida looked down, and his eyes widened at seeing a loose wrap of capture tape around his wrist. But how dash? The birds got you when you blacked out a moment ago and reached up to grab the railing. I'm fairly sure you've got a concussion. And your comm seems to be missing, 'cause All Might just called the match. Ida blinked and reached up, surprised when he realized his comm was indeed missing. We lost. Izuku chuckled, with the faintest hint of humor in his voice. You did. He strode down the stairs to Ida, the birds scattering to leave the building through the open windows on the top floor, just another gambit unused and unneeded. Good game. Time, 5:59 a.m. Izuku screamed as his arms were held down. He looked up and cursed as the animatronics held him down on the table. Chica and Foxy held his arms, while Bonnie was pinning his legs, one of which was clearly broken. He cursed and twisted, but it only brought him more pain. Then, slow, methodical footsteps approached. Freddy was coming, and in his hands was an animatronic. It was shaped like a young girl in a bright pink dress where the paint wasn't flaking off. Freddy approached, and Izuku could only thrash more as the animatronic girl was set on the table next to him. It hissed and clicked and twisted, And like a coffin, it began to open up, springs and gears shifting as the outer casing revealed a far too small space, shaped like a skeleton. Izuku twisted, only to shout in pain as he felt his right shoulder pop and dislocate. With terrifying synchronization from the animatronics hold him, he was lifted up, the three of them dragging him through the air to hang over the empty animatronic. With a strange sense of care, he was lowered, his feet hitting it first. However, as soon as his legs were held tight against the casing, it closed and he screamed in pain. He glanced down to see blood pooling from the joints and gaps of the metal, mixed with fibers and ripped-up flesh that were once his legs. He screamed and twisted, dislocating his other shoulder with a jerk as the pain overwhelmed him. And then, even as Freddy was about to lower him, his vision went black. The pain faded away, and a glowing white 6 a.m. appeared in his vision, with a comforting chime of bells echoing through the darkness. As the 6 a.m. faded away, a counter appeared. 17 nights complete. As All Might stared at the screen, tapping the commands to have the recovery bots come to collect Ida, he reviewed what he had just watched, as the students behind him whispered and gossiped about the same. Young Midoriya was an enigma, and his actions were inconsistent with what All Might had been warned of. His actions and techniques were refined, yes, but he had shown no real drive or intention to end the fight at the start. The counting of how many times he could have eliminated his opponents at the start was terrifying. Just at the start, the match could have been ended instantly, but instead the teen had playfully unnerved his opponents. All Might's trained eyes and combat experience also showed through at the realization that many of Midoriya's tricks, traps and surprises went largely unused. The coils of rope, the open windows, even the birds, a distraction, had been fairly useless in the long run. Young Midoriya, please escort Ida to the front of the building. A transport to the infirmary and recovery girl's attention should see him back to class soon enough. Understood, the curt and monotone reply made All Might's skin crawl. Where was the joy, the expression of interest that was evident in the teen's actions but not his voice? It was simply unnatural. On the screen, Midoriya grabbed the taller teen's arm and pulled Ida close, hooking the teen's arm around his shoulders and bracing as he assisted the speedster to the first floor. Or maybe, All Might mused to himself, sharp eyes catching a building tension in Izuku's frame from the contact. It's far more natural for him to keep people away than anyone could expect. At the bottom, Tokoyami was still pinned, trying to get Dark Shadow enough leverage to yank the knives free. The Quirk was grumbling, shifting and twisting to grab the knives, but since couldn't brace against his companion as he normally would, it was unable to make the knives come free. As footsteps approached, the raven-headed teen looked to see Midoriya supporting his comrade, whose armor looked cracked and head lolled somewhat, as opposed to his once perfect posture. What happened to him? Tokoyami asked as he passed by. Tripwire and the stairwell. Realizing that was likely the crashing sound the raven-haired teen had heard earlier, he nodded and laid back down. When he's taken care of, would you be so kind? The sentence was cut off as out of the stairwell, Koda glanced down the hall, stony head scratched at sheepishly and a large rat on his shoulder. I can help. Midoriya glanced back from where he neared the doorway out and nodded. Pull towards his feet and up. With that, the two armored teens left the building. A few minutes of getting his grip and figuring out how to crouch to get the right leverage, and the knives slowly came loose, jerking up and being set down nearby. Thank you for your assistance, animal speaker. Tokoyami nodded, Dark Shadow shaking its head in thanks as well. The rocky teen grinned and rubbed his neck, before looking up as Midoriya strode through the front entrance and back down the hallway by himself, the tall red boots silent and black cloth hanging down from around his shoulders swaying. As he approached, his hands came up as if to sign, before he glanced at Tokoyami and spoke instead. Koda, I'm gonna gather my remaining supplies back up. Say thanks to the birds for me, and sorry they didn't get to perform their act. The monotone voice was soft and careful, even as the teen crouched and picked up his knives, a smooth motion sliding them behind his back under the loose cloak he still wore tucked into hidden sheaths in the small of his back. As he strode past, Tokoyami spoke up, picking up the discarded red plastic flare that had burned out only a minute before the match. "Thank you for the match. It was quite illuminating." As Izuku glanced back, lips twitching, a hint of humor in his eyes. "Anytime." With that, the wraith-like figure wandered up the stairs. Koda blinked and tilted his head. Is that a pun? Tokoyami merely gave a slow blink before he walked away, as Dark Shadow giggled inside his cloak. Izuku breathed deep as he collected the looped ropes from around the top floor, and pulled a small crowbar from his pouch to recover the pitons that held them ready. Back window escape route, main stairwell rapid descent, the 5th to 3rd floor rappel rope, tripwires 1 to 5, snare hoops, anchor cord for 2nd floor landing. Checking off the rope lengths and locations in his mind, he slid the last piton back in his pocket, before pulling one of the 2 knives he used to pin Tokoyami. The tip was deformed from impact and the top third of the blade had been warped and dulled by slamming it into concrete. Sadly, he had expected this. Just like his blade was rough and poor quality, these had been cheap acquisitions, more from random junk shops and novelty stores than an actual bladesmith. He was more surprised they hadn't snapped under the force he subjected them to. He would have to requisition more blades from Hatsume. God, he missed that parrying dagger he had picked up in New Londo. It had been extremely useful as a backup until he broke it off in Havel's eye. His eyes closed in remembrance and he could almost feel it. The long walk through the undead burg to the outer wall, avoiding archers and firebombs while slaying dozens of undead. He had rested at the top of the tower, below where he had defeated the Taurus demon and the path to Solaire's perch. And then he had descended the empty tower, passing through storerooms until he reached the bottom floor, where Havel, the massive knight who wielded a dragon's fang as a club, awaited him. The fight had been brutal, and when his blade, one of the many longswords in the realm, had snapped under a poorly blocked hit from the fang, Izuku had acted on desperate impulse. He still remembered the feeling of the blade sliding through his helmet's slitted face, cutting off Havel's chuckle of victory. He could hear the scream of pain as his desperate last trick struck home, the sound and feel of the blade snapping as the knight had reared back, the club swinging wildly and knocking Izuku against the wall, caving in his latest breastplate and breaking bones, but not quite fatal enough to keep him down. He remembered the sense of satisfaction as the shattered longsword he had kept hold of had slid past the knight's heavy armor, sneaking up under the arm raised to his face, and into the knight's heart. He also remembered leaving the bloody and far too heavy remains of Havel and his armor to rust and fade, only taking his ring as a sign of victory. Breathing out in a sharp exhale, Izuku stood, tossing the knife in his hand up and catching it absently as he turned. He had wasted enough time here. There were more fights to watch, and he expected the fighters from the last match would return soon, all but Kaken having been sent to the infirmary to get patched up before his match had begun. However, as he strode out the front door of the building, knives and gear all stowed, he was met with a surprise. Freddy Night 3. 12:06 a.m. Freddy Death Count 44. Hello? Hey, you're doing great. Most people don't last this long. I mean, they usually move on to other things by now. I'm not implying that they died. That's not what I meant. Anyway, I better not take up too much of your time. Things start getting real tonight. Hey, listen, I had an idea. If you happen to get caught and want to avoid getting stuffed into a Freddy suit, try playing dead. No dash. Izuku reached back and tapped the receiver, the voicemail cutting off as he shoved the myriad of crumbled papers and ads from the desk to the floor. Sorry phone buddy, but I've heard you say that way too much. He finished clearing the desk and he reached out. The mirror mounted on the wall was lifted and he held it. Glancing at the deep bags under his eyes he could see in the reflection and the fact his hair was slightly longer. It's been what, a month? I need to check next time I die. He set the mirror against the wall behind him, angled to let him see down the left hallway from the desk. The posters were ripped down next, and Izuku tossed them in the trash can, whistling as he reached out and tapped the right door control and shut it on Chika's face. With that done, he stood and stretched before the desk. He held out his hand and spoke clearly. Notebook. A flicker of light and a leather-bound notebook landed in his hand, and he slammed it to the table with gusto, flipping it open to a pair of pages covered in math, a sketch of the rooms, and a list of times and events. The bottom left corner was stained by rust-colored splatters. "Alright, let's go you mechanical Fs." Izuku growled as he unplugged the fan from the wall, lips twitching as a smile formed. "I want to play." In the darkness beyond the office, the animatronics moved to meet him. Bakugo leaned against the wall, hands clenching and flexing as he fed more sweat into the cylinders around his wrists, topping off his ammo. Some of that sweat was from the anxious churning in his gut as he watched his childhood friend tear his opponents apart. Grace, skill, weapons, tactics. Everything Katsuki once considered to be things he was unmatched at. And for years, he was right. But he had watched the streams, found highlights of the various games and more well-known bits of Izuku's imprisonment. From the compilations of him outrunning Slender in the early days, to the far more well-known Outlast final run. Katsuki knew that the Watchers, as they called themselves, was a fairly small community in the grand scheme of things, but once they realized that Izuku felt and lived through every game, they had dedicated forums and videos to breaking down tactics and skills, to hunting up dog-eared 200-year-old game maps and playthroughs, hoping and waiting until they could help the runner in the games. After Game 4, they got their chance. Bakugo remembers dozens of hours where he was sitting staring at a screen, much like today. And when that gate opened, when the video stream of Izuku, face pale and exhausted, eyes manic and with bags so deep and dark they looked black, stared out from the screen. He also remembers the messages he typed but never sent. What could he say in the end? Even he didn't know. Regardless, Bakugo watched as two of the hero students made their way into the control room to murmurs. All Might turned to the two students, and an eyebrow arched. In confusion. "Ah, young Koda, where is your partner?" Koda opened his mouth to answer before Tokoyami cut in. "Midoriya-san is currently recovering the gear he used to trap and prepare the room. He stated he would only take a minute or two." The teacher nodded and glanced at the cameras, while Katsuki mimicked him, seeing only a glimpse as Deku walked off of one screen onto another, passing outside. "Hey, Tokoyami, right?" The voice was excited and brash, and Bakugo glanced over to see spiky red hair as another teen walked up to the cloaked crow guy. "Indeed. And you are Kirishima, correct?" "Yeah. Anyway, I was wondering how the hell you lost that fight, man. I mean, your quirk is really flashy and cool, and he ripped right through it. Did he use his quirk to counter yours or something?" As the crow seemed to shuffle awkwardly, Katsuki let out a snort of derision. "The nerd doesn't have a quirk. That was sheer skill and experience." The rest of the class turned towards him in confusion, before the door opened once more and the dangerous nerd in question walked through, eyebrow quirked in an expression of amusement. Mainly at the small hawk perched on his armored shoulder, glancing around. Honestly, Izuku didn't know it really care why most of them were looking at him like that. Was it the hawk on his arm? You'd think that would be pretty low on the list of weird occurrences. Or maybe his internal scale was just fed up more than he thought. Bringing his arms up, careful to not disrupt the hawk, he signed to Koda. "It seems I've picked up Hitchhiker. Would you ask why he stuck around?" Koda blinked and walked to Izuku's side, voice dropping as he started talking with the hawk, the larger teen's natural height putting him just a few inches taller than the bird. While that happened, the rest of the class seemed to be frozen in a state of confusion and hesitation. Katsuki was the one who seemed to really be willing to talk, but seemed too preoccupied with smirking and watching the rest of the class. Great. Now he was going to have to solve the mystery by himself. "Are you really Quirkless?" Izuku gave a slow, languid blink as he turned his head. He ignored the sudden bloodstains on the walls and the sound of a corpse hitting the floor as he focused. The voice came from the tall, sophisticated-looking girl across the room, black hair spiked out behind her head as gray eyes assessed the teen. "I am. Is that a problem for you?" He was calm, you could even describe him as monotone. The blood that rushed down his fingertips was fake, nothing but an afterthought. "I'm more curious as to where a quirkless teenager managed to pick up more refined skills than most heroes I've met." Izuku let his heart rate pulse faster, let his reins slip looser, just for a second, just to give him the clarity and freedom to really transmit his thoughts. He slowly stretched his mouth into a bright and cheerful smile. his eyes closing as he let it stretch just a bit too wide, a bit too sharp. Even through his lashes he could see the faces pale, the eyes blink in confusion and bodies shift in unease. But I learned from experience. His voice was sharper and higher pitched, snarkier, a bit of bite, of venom, of sarcastic glee. He let his emotions leak for just a second, before his smile faded like mist in the morning sun, his green eyes gleaming dark as his heart rate slowed once more. That enough of an explanation? He watched with careful eyes as Yaoyorozu Momo slowly and deliberately swallowed, before she nodded once. He had to give it to her, she hid her fear well. I apologize for overstepping my grounds. The rest of the class seemed to be ready to fall into a half-terrified silence, before All Might cleared his throat, clearly not having expected being ignored. Well then, since most of our teams are here this round, let's review. Tuning out All Might as he began to speak to the rest of the class about the fight, but keeping enough awareness to follow along. Izuku's eyes glanced to Koda, whose hands signed a few short sentences that explained the situation. Young bird, curious of you. Calls you the human. Raptor, I guess? Wants to learn from you by watching. Offers to provide a pair of eyes. Will assist me as well. Izuku gave another slow blink, one that conveyed curiosity and consideration, before shifting his eyes to meet the sharp gaze of the raptor still on his shoulder, before his hands signed back. Tell him sure, but he'll need to practice with us later. Koda seemed taken aback somewhat, but nodded, before leaning in to whisper to the bird. Izuku made a mental note to ask what type of bird, and what types of food and needs it would want from them. MVP of the match? The class shifted and murmured, before a girl with deep purple hair and earphone-looking lines off her ears raised her hand. Yes, Jiro-san? I would assume it's Midoriya. He was on top and focused on the enemy team the entire match. The only reason why he wouldn't be the MVP is that he didn't go for those kill shots early on. Speaking softly, so softly he doubted even Koda at his side could easily hear, Izuku gave her a hint. What would a fight that ends so fast teach? His eyes caught Jiro's tense shoulders, and the flinch from a taller masked teen with 6 shifting arms across the room. Curious. 2 with hearing that caught that. Regardless, All Might was already breathing in to speak. Well said, young Jiro. Midoriya was indeed directly in control of almost the entire match, and Koda performed his support role quite well. You could not hear it, sadly, but young Koda took out the lights, and was providing information and scouting via his animal companions. As the class muttered and spoke in understanding, Koda shifted under the occasional glances while Izuku shifted his arm up, the hawk leaping to his gauntlet arm and then up to Koda's shoulder. The presence of an animal companion almost instantly seemed to calm Izuku's teammate from agitated to simply uneasy. As the class moved on, Izuku watched as the paired teams began to leave. He slid a small pocketbook from his pocket, flipping it open and glancing at the matchups he had marked down earlier. Shuji Mizo and Mineta Minoru defending against Aoyama Yuga and Azui Tiu. Following that would be Yaoyorozu Momo and Jirokyuka against Sato Rikido and Shiro Hanta, and the final match would be Uraraka Ochako and Kirishima Ijiro against Ojiro Mashireo and Kaminari Denki. Flipping to a clean page, Izuku kicked a foot back to rest against the wall and sat on the heel of his boot, knee up as a desk as he focused. He watched the screens, the current group using the same building Izuku and Koda had. With a slow breath, he let himself diffuse his attention, eyes only flickering to focus when something was important on the monitors. He ignored the sound of children's music that began to softly play, haunting his thoughts. Freddy Night 3. 4:36 a.m. Freddy Death Count. 44. Still. Relaxed but still. Don't move, don't blink, don't shift. Izuku's eyes watched while he kept his heartbeat slow. 3, 2, 1. Izuku rolled out from under the dining room booth table and leaped behind the marching Bonnie, darting forwards to grab the last instrument off the stage before the animatronic could turn to him, and vaulting from the stage to another table before skidding around the corner and darting back down the hall into the office, grinning as he eyed his collection resting under the phone. He had stolen all their instruments, and he had plenty of time left. He checked the camera quickly. All right, 23% and an hour left. Yeah, that'll work. He sat on the desk chair and breathed deeply. He knew he was insane, that he was being stupid setting these goals for himself. But the rush, the emotion, was wonderful. The adrenaline of facing them, the rush of accomplishing something after so long. Even as he reached out and his hand hit the button to close the door, only the faintest form of Bonnie's angry mechanical expression visible as the barrier slammed shut, Izuku giggled. He was running on euphoria. But he could tell things would get worse soon. Fungi was nervous in the day 3 message. And Izuku was getting bad vibes about tomorrow. And that was not even considering how strained, how weird, Izuku's mind felt anymore. The long up to 6-hour sessions, the stress, the constant state of alertness. He was changing. And he wasn't sure how it would end. Night 4:1 and 6 seconds a.m. Freddy death count, 51. Izuku knelt down and tied his shoes on, checking they were tight, the tall red and black boots gleaming in the half-light of the office. Behind him, the phone rang, before clicking on. Hello, hello? Hey, wow, Day, I knew you could do it. Izuku breathed deep, blinking away a tear from his eye as he stood up glancing at his pitch-black jeans and long-sleeve shirt. In the dark, he looked almost invisible, and from a pocket he pulled his beanie and a black mask that would wrap around his face. Hey, listen, I may not be around to send you a message tomorrow. The echo of banging began to play behind the guy's voice as Izuku pulled the mask on. Banging, it's been a bad night here for me. I'm kinda glad that I recorded my messages for you. When I did. Izuku breathed deep and tucked his hair under the black of his beanie before stretching. His eyes roamed across both closed doors. Hey, do me a favor? Maybe sometime, you could check inside those suits in the back room? I'm gonna try to hold out until someone checks. Maybe it won't be so bad. The sound of banging grew louder, more aggressive. I always wondered what was in all those empty heads back there. Izuku stood tall and let out a slow hissed exhale past his mask. 2 chimes echoed out, each one out of sync. One from the phone behind him. And one from out in the pizzeria. You know. From the phone a deep echoed out. Oh no dash. Before the sound of the phone guy's death could play once more, Izuku reached out and tapped the button to end the recording. He felt sick. He felt like he had cracked and fractured. That things that made sense, things that were inherently Midoriya Izuku, were tilted and misshapen. He had woken up only a few runs ago. The first time he had come into night that recording. It had snapped him out of it, had dragged him back from the edge of his madness. What happened to being a hero? What happened to sacrifice, to joy and smiling as he saved people? Izuku tried to smile, but the face behind his mask wasn't one of joy. It was a snarl of hate. All right, you fuckers. Izuku cracked his knuckles and braced, waiting as the screen on across the room showed his power drop drastically as loud thuds began to echo out from the doors. Time to change the rules. 20 minutes later, the doors failed, the power out, and the animatronics strode into the room. And Izuku was nowhere to be seen. Izuku's notes were simple, but he was satisfied he had watched each match, breaking down the heroes and villains as they fought, but refraining from the after-action commentary. Shuji was a tank of a hero, with a surprisingly versatile mindset. Enhanced senses to negate stealth, unorthodox fighting style to pin and grapple, and plenty of drive, despite the far more cowardly companion he found himself with. A point to Mineta Minoru, however, was the sheer utility of his quirk. From sealing doors to lining windows and trapping hallways, the purple orbs he created had their use. As for the opponents of the two, Aoyama Yuga was flashy and direct. Izuku remembering his quick encounter with the French descent teen earlier on, in the entrance exam. The teen's quirk was powerful, but much like Mineta, Aoyama's mindset was a distraction, not a boon. His partner, however, was almost as well-rounded as Shuji seemed to be. Agility, speed, a mid-range strike. From her tongue, and almost as much proficiency at grapples and pins as Shuji, if from a far different standpoint. The fight had been close, with an early advantage to the hero team in the fact that Aoyama's laser was far more destructive and long-range than any other fighter. The teen had used the length of the building to blast holes around the defending villain team, while Azui had engaged and maneuvered past them. Sadly, Mineta had been taken out while pinning Azui, her knockout kick a thing of beauty. From then it was a matter of time and stamina, and Shuji was far more conservative than Aoyama. The villain team won, time running out and Aoyama stalemated. Izuku left out a soft, almost inaudible sigh in disappointment at the lack of tactics, and flipped pages. His dark green eyes once more glancing over the notes he had on the next two fights. Yaoyorozu Momo, one of the recommendation students, with a quirk that was as dangerous as it was versatile. He had watched her generate a taser, flashbangs, and HNDCFFS as she went along, and that was when he was focusing on her gear. She could make nearly anything as long as she understood the component parts and atomic structure. The mere glance at that written phrase made Izuku's hands twitch and his finely honed scavenger senses tingle in joy. Weapons, armor, explosives, ammo, and even electronics. The engineer in him was screaming in desire almost as much as his scavenger was. He let loose a soft, almost inaudible hum into the fur collar of his cloak, glanced at his notes for the other three in that match. A sensor and mid-range fighter in Jirakyuka, whose quirk he had noted was surprisingly dangerous on a physical level, considering she had slammed the metal tip through concrete. There was Sato and Zero, who was a strange combination of trap specialist and strength tank. Zero had lined the floor around the bomb with sticky web-like structures formed from his tape, and Sato had patrolled the lower floors leading up to the bomb. Sadly, it seemed that Jiru's support gear was an effective armor-bypassing attack, one he noted he needed a counter for. Perhaps a better set of earpieces? He circled the note before glancing at the results. Yaoyorozu and her gear had provided an easy solution to the tape. A simple magnesium flare shaped onto the end of a staff had let her burn and clear a way through, and Jiru had darted past her while she occupied Zero, allowing the first of the hero teams to score. The final match had been two familiar faces. Uraraka had spoken with him on and off since his first meeting with her, even texting him once or twice to ask about something. To be perfectly honest, the tall girl was polite and kind, but seemed bubbly. A bit too exuberant. He enjoyed her presence, that faith and joyful enthusiasm bringing old memories to his thoughts. Beyond that, her quirk was interesting, reminding Izuku of the stasis mechanic of Dead Space and of his times playing in Zero Gravity, and the shenanigans within. Her teammate, Kirishima, and his quirk also brought to mind plenty of memories. The sheer variety and number of durable enemies he had faced, from the relentless androids of distant and alien-infested Sevastopol Station, to the armored tanks known as the Big Daddies who roamed Rapture. Izuku was already sure that in a fight he could win. He knew from experience that armor and durability meant nothing if you understood how people's bodies worked, and how to abuse joints to make people break themselves. Ojiro Mashireo and Kaminari Denki were a different story. Ojiro's skill and technique far outshone both of his competitors and his teammate, with a clear style and practiced motions. Izuku was fairly confident that if he had to fight the tailed teen, he could hold his own, but the teen's reach and flexibility were developed enough that he wouldn't be able to guarantee a win. But the other teen was a threat and a half, if only for a single shot. Izuku's armor was insulated, his rubberized red boots working to help with that, but he knew that with enough current, it would arc through the air. And judging by the way that the blonde teen shot sparks and bolts of lighting out, Izuku was more than concerned about getting in close. The teen's overloaded state had made his mouth quirk into a smile for a second, but Izuku was well aware of how dangerous live currents could be. He's died to them a few times before. Shaking the thought away, he glanced down and mentally reviewed that Uraraka and Kirishima had won. Though he verified his mental note from the entrance exam that when Uraraka dispelled her stasis effect, the object regained mass, but kept momentum. Kirishima had gone through 3 walls like that. A tap of his fingers, and he marked one last note, eyes trailing to his teacher and the hero he admired above all. All Might. Old injury? Strain builds over time. Research villain fights where chest was injured. Look for recovery time PRD. Likely 2 to 8 year time frame. He frowned and flipped the notebook closed, shifting to lean against the wall as Uraraka, Kirishima, and Ojiro helped escort a dazed-looking Kaminari back to the security office. He glanced at the blood stains he could feel creeping up his arms, and focused to keep his mind quiet. I need to get some peace and quiet soon, before I start doing something stupid. By now, a solid third of the class had been injured in some form, and aside from quick trips to the infirmary to deal with anything greater than some bruises, or the fact that Todoroki was currently in bed rest to deal with his quirk exhaustion. As the class that was not being held back gathered and began to chat and talk about things, Izuku shifted slightly, perched near the door frame and letting his casual fighting demeanor bleed away as he slowly began to rest once more, the interesting new information already filtering through his thoughts, reflexes and instinct assessing his classmates as they finished up their last class of the day. As he let his focus slip, as he let his mind drift from the task at hand, he realized he had miscalculated. He didn't need peace and quiet soon. He needed now. A spike, minuscule, from 36 beats per minute to 51, and his senses began to crawl with instincts and paranoia. He took a final deep breath and stepped out the door, hearing All Might dismissing the rest of the class even as he preempted the hero. He doubted the hero would notice, and even if All Might did, then he would simply have to explain. He knew his condition, his insanity. And he knew when his grip on it started to slip. So, with that in mind, he walked, footsteps silent and measured. From the curve of his spine to his arm placement, his posture carefully molded to be nonchalant and relaxed. He focused, the ringing sound of screams and duns and hissing, twisting, mad muttering all faintly on the edge of his hearing. He had pushed it. He had let himself wake up, let himself exist just a bit too much. The instincts, the memories that he knew he was insane. Knew that if he hadn't gotten in UA, then he'd be locked up in some psych ward or a prison. He saw the locker room ahead of him, and bit his lip, a familiar and yet now so much more real taste of blood and copper on his tongue as he turned away, taking a door he had seen earlier, an empty classroom greeting him as he closed the door, the faint sounds of his classmates echoing past the wooden barrier as he let his hands untense, fingertips shaking with sensation, with want and need. He leaned back against the wall next to the door, and let his legs slowly give out, his back sliding down the wall as he closed his eyes, shifting so one knee was propped against his chest, and the other leg was stretched, tensed and ready. Like that, Izuku focused and took slow deep breaths. He ignored the static. He filtered past the sounds of creaking pipes and distant screams and growls. He breathed deep and shoved his mouth in the fur collar of his armor, letting the unique musty scent of the fake fur block out the taste of ash and the smell of death and rot. Breathed deep and slow, hands clenching and flexing as he focused. He looked up and blinked, the flickering shadow of Freddy Fazbear fading and twisting into the all-too-familiar and hated form of Slender, into the crown-like armor of Lautrec, before his mind reasserted reality over insanity. Gotta focus, gotta relax. The words slipped through bloodied lips in a nearly inaudible whisper as he closed his eyes once more, turning his focus inwards, on his body. The tears on his face were salty, but not ice-cold like the leaks of rapture. His bloodied mouth tasted of copper but not arterial sprays from Raccoon City. His skin felt clammy, the heat of his blood fighting against the sudden chill of the empty room, but it wasn't the ice-cold touch of Slender. After a bit, he felt the surge of sensory hallucinations begin to fade. Specific memories locked away. Once more, particular thoughts and aches fading back into that familiar full-body sensation as if he was standing near a generator, as if his body was charged and powered and flowing with dark, sinister energy. He breathed and exhaled in a slow, measured pace. He reached into his pocket and pulled his phone, tapping the stopwatch app even as he placed his fingers on his neck. He could feel it, the heartbeat hovering just over 40, but the process would help. Would ground him. 1.2.3.4. He counted each pulse, feeling as they slowly, oh so slowly, dropped from what a normal person would consider resting, to his slow and sleeping pace. 33 beats per minute. 32. 31. He waited. Another 30, and then another, and another. He breathed slowly and closed his eyes, and when he opened them, the bloodstains had faded away. He waited, patiently, and when they didn't return, he slowly stood. He glanced at the clock and scowled, letting the expression bloom across his face in self-deprecation. 24 minutes to get under control. That's too long. He shoved away from the wall and turned and stepped through the door. Thankfully, heroics was the last class of the day, which meant he had plenty of time to go and change back into his uniform, or, since it was the end of the day, he could change into something more casual. Nodding, he paced towards the locker rooms. Night 4 and 6 seconds a.m. Freddy death count, 51. 4. 3. On 1, Izuku slid the panel free, looking from the ceiling crawl space down into the maintenance room. All the animatronics were still looking for him, steady clunking and clicking metal echoing through the building. He doubted this would work again, considering how the animatronics seemed to learn and adapt to Izuku's actions, but now he had finally gotten a chance to check out this room. The other 4 or 5 times he had tried, he had ended up getting grabbed nearly instantly. Something about this room set off the robots like nothing else if they saw him get near. Reaching out, he slowly lowered himself from the rafters into the room, glancing around the room and trying not to flinch when empty mechanical spaces stood open and waiting. He had died to them far too often. Glancing around, he froze. There, in the corner, a tall cowboy-styled raccoon animatronic sat limp. Seeping from its joints, from its cracks and panels, was a dark red crust. Even out and around it, a dark-stained pool of dried blood stretched, along with a clear line where it had been dragged and discarded in the corner. In its hand, a black and blue cap, the white letters VC and IU clear past the blood-stained grip. F-. Izuku let a slow and silent sigh and creeped towards the animatronic, reaching out to slowly tilt the head up, where dried and blood-stained blue eyes, human eyes, stared out blankly, preserved behind a glass surface, while hanging from the loose jaw, red and yellow teeth gleamed, cracked and broken, from its mouth. Slowly, Izuku let the head drop and sighed in regret. He glanced down and blinked. He had another thing held in the other hand, almost posed. A high-quality flashlight with a cracked glass lens. Glancing around and listening to the still distant animatronic noises, Izuku slowly slid the flashlight free and tucked it in his pocket, before looking around the room once more. He carefully lifted and shifted piles of parts, looking for anything that would give him an, "Oh, this might work." He reached down and pulled from under a half-welded-up plate, a blue canister with a nozzle on top. He glanced at the side, and felt his lips curl in a grin, he thumb wiping dust off the bright red and yellow warning label. Warning: extremely flammable. Fire explosion hazard. Keep blowtorch aimed away from flammable objects. Izuku glanced back and heard the approaching footsteps of one of the animatronics, Bonnie by the sound, and leapt off the counter and back into the ceiling, sliding the panel closed even as the mechanical rabbit stepped back into the room. In the rafter, Izuku eyed the torch in his hand, before his eyes snapped up. I wonder, is the kitchen's gas line on? 3 rooms down from the abandoned class Izuku had claimed for his breakdown, Jirkyuka slowly opened the door, eyes glancing to confirm what her ear jacks had told her. The green-haired teen that was her classmate was long gone. She slowly walked to the room he had broken down in, worry on her features. I could hear his heart rate spike, and then his counting thing, but what triggered it? She had changed after class, but when she could still hear the counting mutters of her classmate, she had doubled back and hidden nearby, to keep tabs on him and make sure he was safe. She glanced in the room and then down the hall. What the hell do I do now?